Welcome back to MSNBC's special coverage of Super Tuesday, where it is still Tuesday and more super all the time. Let's go to NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff, who's at the Orange County Registrar's Office in Southern California. Now, Jacob, by my watch, voting is still underway in California for another hour or so. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
What are you seeing?
Yeah, Rachel, it's happening right. Check this out. Well, we're going to see them go right now. We were talking about how weird. I was listening to your conversation earlier about how the primary system is here, the top two primary system. Not only do we no longer have widespread, you can vote in person if you want. I remember I was out here almost 5 years ago talking to you on this very sidewalk in 2018. Stretched down this sidewalk, the entire line was filled with people. Because in 2020 with COVID, we started to move to an all mail-in ballot, at least permanent mail-in ballot. Everyone gets one if they want to use one. Everybody's doing sort of a different thing. We have drive-through voting, and I just want to give a very special shout-out to our election workers because we love our election workers. Tell me your name again.
Hi, Sandra.
Sandra, you said you're a social worker when you're not doing this?
Yes.
So have you been meeting a lot of interesting people as they've been coming through on the drive-through vote tonight?
Yes.
What are they telling you? They're happy to be coming out here?
Oh, very appreciative of our service and the availability for them to drive up to the ballot box.
Well, let me tell you something. We're appreciative of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this. Rachel, as we wait to see if another car comes through, what I want to tell you about what is so interesting about this, particularly about the Senate race here. Here in Orange County, not only is the presidential race going to be potentially decided, in this building, the fifth largest election jurisdiction in the country for California, because there are so many Republicans here, but also the Senate contest and also those House races that you mentioned. And the Senate race is so interesting in California because of the top two system. You have seen Adam Schiff spend an incredible amount of money to essentially prop up, and this is both an allegation from Katie Porter, who he's running against, but also he admits this strategy. He's spending a bunch of money to prop up Steve Garvey as his Republican opponent because he'd rather face a Republican in the general election in California than face a fellow Democrat, Katie Porter. Whatever happens in this race, all of these members of Congress, Barbara Lee included, running for office, are going to be vacating their seats because they're running for this Senate seat. And so you're going to have a situation where the House of Representatives could very well be up in the air because someone like a Katie Porter, who in 2018 was part of those Democrats that flipped the House by running and winning in this county, at this election jurisdiction, will very well may no longer be in Congress if she doesn't end up in the top two come the end of the night tonight. So we have 1 hour, 1 minute, and 40 seconds left here for cars to keep coming, for people to keep voting, and ultimately we'll see what happens. But if and when it does, it's going to happen right here in Orange County.
Jacob, can I just ask you, too, we've been talking about the jungle primary system and this sort of, it's not California didn't invent it. It happens in some other places. But the idea is it doesn't matter what party you are. If you finish as one of the top two people in the primary, you move on to the general election. California hasn't been doing this for very long. It's having profound consequences in terms of the contours of the race, spending, the politics, the strategy of the race, as we're seeing, especially in this dramatic Senate race to replace Dianne Feinstein. Is it controversial in the state? It has been a radical change in the way people vote and the way politics are conducted. How do Californians feel, even just anecdotally, that you're experiencing about this change in the way they conduct their politics now?
Confused, Rachel, because I think a lot of people are thinking about, do they need to vote strategically? If you were going to vote for Barbara Lee, for instance, who trails in the polls behind Katie Porter, should you vote for Katie Porter instead so that potentially she has a shot of facing Adam Schiff in this top two primary? What do we call the jungle? What people call the jungle primary out here. And Katie Porter herself has called the campaign that Adam Schiff has been running brazenly cynical. It's not something that you would expect to hear from two colleagues on the Democratic side of the House of Representatives, but it has gotten really acrimonious because of the way that you have to compete with one another. As you said, it's not new. When Gavin Newsom ran back all the way in 2018, I'm sure the internet will correct me if I'm wrong, but he ran a similar strategy. He spent a lot of money propping up John Cox, the gentleman who ended up running against him in the finals of that election, over the familiar Democratic mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa, who many people thought was going to be a shoo-in to face Gavin Newsom in that gubernatorial runoff election. So, I do think that there will be an accounting after this election as to whether it is the most effective way for Democrats to have their voice heard, to have a healthy debate of ideas. It's a very, as you said, it's a very important Senate seat. The idea that a Republican in a state that has a 2-to-1 Democratic majority could end up in a runoff election in the top two system is not something I think a lot of people want to see as a possibility here in California, but that is the possibility we're faced with tonight.
Yeah, it's high risk, high reward strategy for Adam Schiff and his campaign to be pursuing that. Jacob Soboroff, I know we will be checking back in with you. Thank you, my friend. It's great to have you there. I'm worried that I'm sort of worried that Jacob is going to like kind of commandeer a car that came by with the, you know what I'm saying? Like he was like,
ready.
While we wait to see if another car comes by. Jacob, I'm sorry, they just put you back. Were you going to actually like stick your arms in the window of a car if one came by?
Where? Come on, Rachel. Let's just come on, let's just do it.
Be careful.
Is this your first time doing drive-through voting?
No.
It's not your first time?
No.
Rachel Maddow's worried I'm going to commandeer your car. I promise I'm not. What's your name?
Debbie.
You want to say what brought you out tonight?
To vote, of course.
For whom, Debbie?
Donald.
Really? Okay, Rachel, there's not enough time to have this conversation. Debbie, I'm going to let you go. If I need a ride, though, I might call you for a ride home later. Okay, thanks, Debbie. Take care. You never know what you're going to get at the drive-through vote.
But we know if Jacob Soboroff is there while people are driving by voting, we know exactly what we're going to get, which is exactly what you just proved. Thank you very much, Jacob.
But she even gave him Donald.
Yeah, she was so proud.
She might have meant a different Donald. What do we know?
He's in a swing district. There was exactly a 50% chance of getting that answer in that particular district. But in other places, you wouldn't get that.
Because it was Jacob Soboroff that we knew we would get an answer.
Yes.
Honestly, if any of us were out there doing that stand-up right now, us stopping that car, it would have been the start of a crime.
The car wouldn't have stopped.
The car wouldn't have stopped. There would have been an altercation. It would have been very... But Jacob just like somehow charms people into being like, oh yeah, hop in. You want to come meet my mom?
There's no difference in his life on camera or off.
Yeah.
I've seen him on the streets of Los Angeles without a camera, just going to restaurants. It's the same guy.
talking to people in the car.
Same guy, same behavior.
asking them who they
Sometimes he
voted for.
walks backwards, sometimes sideways.
He wears socks and sandals on and off TV.
Can we go back to the Adam Schiff?
We can, in just 1 second, we have a call to make. The decision desk is summoning us to the great state of Utah. The Democrats held a primary in Utah tonight, and the decision desk can project, NBC News can project that Democrat Joe Biden, it is too early to call in the Utah Democratic primary. I apologize. That is my mistake. But we do also have another call from a different state in Texas. This is in the gubernatorial, excuse me, I'm sorry, I've made 2 mistakes in 1 minute. I need to drink some water and calm down. This is the Democratic U.S. Senate primary in Texas. NBC News can project that the winner of the Democratic U.S. Senate primary in Texas will be Colin Allred, who was favored here. He's a Republican congressman. He turfed out a Republican incumbent to get into Congress in the first place. He's a moderate. He's a very effective campaigner. He's a very good fundraiser. And he is Ted Cruz's worst nightmare in terms of Ted Cruz holding onto his seat in Texas. We now have... There you go. In Utah, a projected winner in the Democratic contest. President Joe Biden is the projected winner there. I will say, I apologize for a little bit of confusion there. Part of my confusion is that in Utah, they're running 2 totally different types of contests. The Democrats running a primary. We just saw President Biden projected as the winner of that. The Republicans are running a caucus in Utah tonight, and that does not close for an hour. And so my notes to self on this remark are on this point are completely illegible, and I crossed my own wires, and I'm sorry. But you were going to say something about Adam Schiff.
I wish people could listen to themselves when they talk about the Adam Schiff Senate campaign. So there's 3 prominent Democrat members of the House of Representatives who all decide to run for Senate for Dianne Feinstein's seat. They all decide. And so that makes it a difficult decision. And there's a Republican who's not very prominent but decides he's the most prominent Republican. So Adam Schiff and Katie Porter and Barbara Lee, they had a choice in campaigning. And there was this really convenient choice there, which is when you're up there campaigning, you can run against the Republican, or you can run against Katie Porter, or you can run against Barbara Lee. And Adam Schiff made the correct strategic choice that every Democrat should have made: run against the Republican. And because let's just get it straight, it's not a high-risk gamble. It's impossible for a Republican to win statewide in California. It cannot happen. So Adam Schiff or Katie Porter, whoever ends up, if they're in this race with Steve Garvey, they're going to win. There's no doubt about it. The alternative, if people were to follow through what they're saying in this kind of accusatory way about the Schiff campaign, would be a preference, apparently, for Adam Schiff to have spent the time attacking Katie Porter attacking him and Barbara Lee attacking both of them, so that you could get two Democrats running for the same Senate seat in November in the most expensive state in the Union, thereby creating the single most expensive Democratic campaign other than the presidency. What we're likely to end up with here, according to the latest polls, is one Democrat running for Senate in California in an easy race, and he won't need much money.
In terms of the elevating the Republican there, in terms of any...
Well, you know, I'm sorry. People always use the word elevating. They don't use the word attacking. That's a choice. That's a conceptual choice in how we're describing
Steve Garvey having a campaign this big, how many people would have even known that he was running had Adam Schiff not run ads being like, behold, Steve Garvey, the Republican candidate?
All of that is completely true. Yeah. And yes, it did elevate him. But everything I said that I put right beside it is also true at exactly the same time. So people have to ask themselves, what you really wanted was Barbara Lee and Katie Porter attacking each other, and then them attacking Adam Schiff, and Adam Schiff attacking all of them, so that you could get two of them in literally what would be the most expensive Senate campaign in American history.
I will say, I mean, I feel like the tragedy, to the extent that there is one for the Democratic Party in that in that Senate primary in California, is that Barbara Lee and Katie Porter and Adam Schiff are all extraordinarily effective members of Congress. Extraordinarily effective.
I don't know a single California voter who had an easy choice. Not one. And anecdotally, every person.
But the end result, the practical result of the Senate primary is that one of them is probably going to be a senator, but all three of them are going to be out of the House.
To me, the great unfairness of it is California should have a minimum of 6 Senate seats.
Think about the campaigning lesson Lawrence just gave us, right? This argument, don't elevate the person. Don't think of it as elevated. Think of it as attack. Now, apply this to Donald Trump. All the criticisms of, we don't want to hear about Donald Trump, don't talk about him. That's why people have forgotten how he behaved when he was president. And if Joe Biden spent the next 255 days with his huge war chest of money that he's raised, simply reminding the American people of every ridiculous, offensive, terrible thing Donald Trump has done over the last 6 or 7 years, many of those people who are sitting on the couch or not thinking about the election won't say, oh, Trump just got elevated. They'll say, there was a reason to attack him and why we need to vote against him.
I will say the most effective ads that I have seen against Donald Trump this year are the Nikki Haley closing argument ads. She's done two of them now, which are about what it was like when he was president. And so she made this argument overtly to voters during the primary. You know, I was proud to serve as his UN ambassador, and he was the right president at the time and everything. But what she's arguing now is, remember what a nightmare it was for him to be the president of the United States, and just cutting together news clips and clips of him at the White House and reminding people what it felt like.
And by the way, the Democrats are facing a very tough election cycle. Of the three, this is one of the tougher ones. And now they're going to have to fight for a Senate seat in Maryland because the former governor is running. They're going to have to elevate the hell out of him to make sure people don't take a chance on re-electing a fairly moderate former governor and give up a Senate seat there. So I think the point that Lawrence makes is really important. They have to decide where they're going to spend their money. And because the California race then is a fait accompli, they can direct that money. They've got to try to save that Senate majority. Because if, for whatever reason, Donald Trump does win, the Democrats' only way to constrain him is to not have him have full control of the government, and not have a House and a Senate majority. And so Democrats really need to save their Senate majority. They did give up 3 winnable races when you do Wisconsin. Maybe Florida wasn't so winnable, and North Carolina. They can't make any mistakes this time.
And Rachel, you asked about the behavioral effect on California voters. Here's my anecdotal over the last, I don't know, 10 days or so. People sending in their mail-in ballots, making their final decisions. All sorts of people calling me up saying, how should I vote? So here's what they were doing. The latest poll showed Adam Schiff as #1. And it showed Steve Garvey as #2 in the polls. And it showed Katie Porter as #3. So people who couldn't decide, it was a coin toss for them between Katie Porter and Adam Schiff, a lot of them were voting for Katie Porter. in the hope that she would come in second,
Leapfrog.
so they could delay their choice to November between Adam Schiff and Katie Porter.
The whole idea of the jungle primary.
Well, yeah,
That's-
in other words,
yeah.
it turns the voter into a politician.
Yeah. Let's go to our friend Steve Kornacki. One of the races that has been percolating on the back burner all night is a Republican presidential contest in Vermont, where we still don't have a call. It's still too close to call, right, Steve?
It is, and it is. I mean, look, in the grand scheme of things, Donald Trump tonight has added 439 delegates to his total. Nikki Haley's added 3. In the grand scheme of things, a very lopsided night, but not, as you say, in Vermont, because look at this, nearly 90% of the vote is in Vermont. And we've been talking all night about how that Burlington, Vermont area, Burlington, the largest city, and South Burlington there combined, that's the sort of the biggest area vote-wise in the state here. We got South Burlington just a few minutes ago, and this is big in Vermont terms. Haley wins South Burlington by a better than 2-to-1 margin over Trump. Nets, you can see here, nets, 854 votes. 854 votes in the scheme of this election, quite a bit right now, and Haley has now jumped ahead of Donald Trump. She leads him by 2 points statewide, and again, that is without the city of Burlington reporting. And I think you can expect the city of Burlington is going to look just like South Burlington, both in terms of the number of votes there and the way it breaks in Haley's favor. So you can expect this lead to be padded for Nikki Haley. And also, we don't have anything yet. Oh, boy. I messed that up badly. But we don't have anything yet. There we go. From Montpelier, another place I think you can expect Haley to be getting the lion's share of the vote. And again, in Vermont terms, padding that margin. So honestly, this is the kind of situation right now in Vermont. You'd rather be Trump nationally, but in Vermont right now, you'd rather be Nikki Haley than Donald Trump. And one question to keep in mind as these final votes do come in here, there are 17 delegates at stake in Vermont. And if Nikki Haley wins this state with 50.1% of the vote, she'd get all 17. If she wins this state with 49.9, she has to split them, and it would probably be 9-8 for Haley with the delegates. So, again, you got to hit that 50% threshold to take them all. There are other names on the ballot attracting a scattering of support here, and that could be the final variable here as Haley has taken the lead, and you can see a path for her to expand this lead. I think that's becoming the question here. Will she expand it to an outright majority in Vermont?
And again, overall, we're looking at 86% of the vote in now, Steve, and we don't necessarily know when we're going to get more. We don't know enough about how they're going to report, but we'll just keep checking back in with you.
Got it.
All right, Lawrence, over to you.
Joining us now is Mitch Landrieu, national co-chair for the Biden-Harris 2024 presidential campaign, former senior advisor to the president, former mayor of New Orleans. Does the presidential campaign, in reality, between these two eventual nominees, really start tomorrow?
Well, I think it started a long time ago. You know, we've been saying this is going to happen. Folks just kept thinking that it wasn't. But it's been clear to me and many other people that this race was going to be between the future and the past, between two candidates that are men that are very different from each other. Their visions of the country are very different from each other. And as you guys were talking about early, reminding people what the country was like when Donald Trump ran it. So I just want to remind people that 17 of his cabinet members quit and are now advising people to please never vote for Donald Trump again. And what you saw in the last couple of weeks and then tonight is Donald Trump basically eviscerating the Republican Party as we know it. The party of Reagan, the party of Bush, the party of Cheney, Nikki Haley, Mitt Romney, down the line. All of these folks have been warning us about the chaos that Donald Trump caused. And then you can compare him to President Biden, who, as you know, wakes up every day fighting hard for the American people. Trump fights for himself. The president brings people together. Trump splits people apart. And what he's promised us, President Trump, is that he's going to do more of what he did before, and that revenge is going to be, his method of going forward. So I think it's going to be really a clear choice, and I think that people are going to pick going forward rather than going backwards.
David Plouffe, as you know, successful presidential campaign manager, was with us earlier in the evening, and he was saying that President Biden has got to pick up some of these disaffected Republican voters who are currently voting for Nikki Haley, who will be available to get in November. It won't be all of them, but some of them will be available. You live among those voters in Louisiana, like Nikki Haley, a Southerner. You know how to talk to them. What is your coaching for President Biden on how to reach that voter?
Well, I would never presume to coach President Biden about anything. He's the president of the United States, and he's the only guy that we know standing that's ever beat Donald Trump, and he's going to beat him again. So having said that, let me say this. I think what you're seeing in all of these primaries is that Donald Trump's got a real problem. And he's got a real problem in places where presidential elections are actually won and lost. And one of the reasons is because he's taken the Republican Party, as we knew it, and turned it into extreme MAGA party that basically oppresses people. And there's nothing more evident in this than him basically putting 3 justices on the Supreme Court that reversed Roe versus Wade and took away the reproductive rights of women in America. And as a consequence, you see things like completely abandoning the rights to have in vitro fertilization. I think people are going to turn away from that extremism, and I think they're going to vote for Joe Biden in the future.
Mitch Landrieu, New Orleans former mayor, joining us from America's favorite city. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence. Amen to that.
Thank you.
We are keeping an eye right now on Trump campaign headquarters, where I believe we are expecting remarks. Remarks have just started for former President Donald Trump. Let's listen in.
Nobody thought a thing like this would be possible. We wouldn't have Russia attacking Ukraine. We wouldn't have Israel being attacked. Iran, as you know, was broke. When I was running things, they were broke. They didn't have money for Hamas. They didn't have money for Hezbollah. We had no inflation. Inflation is destroying the middle class. It's destroying everything. Inflation, if you look back over the history, hundreds of years back, it's called inflation. It's called a country buster. And that's what it's doing to our country. What's happened with inflation has been unbelievable. A lot of people say, a lot of experts have said the stock market's the only thing that's doing well, and that's doing well because our poll numbers are so much higher than Joe Biden's. He's the worst president in the history of our country. There's never been anything like what's happening to our country. Today it was announced that 325,000 people were flown in from parts unknown. Migrants were flown in, airplane, not going through borders, not going through that great Texas barrier that I was with the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, the other day, and we were looking at the job they're doing. But in the meantime, they're pouring into California and they're pouring into Arizona because those governors aren't doing anything. They're doing nothing. But today it was just announced before I came out. It was unbelievable. I said, that must be a mistake. They flew 325,000 migrants, flew them in over the borders into our country. So that really tells you where they're coming from. They want open borders, and open borders are going to destroy our country. We need borders and we need free and fair elections, or we don't have a country. This is an incredible group of people. So many celebrities that I'm not going to introduce any because I'm just going to get myself in trouble if I do that, because I'll leave out most of you. But this is a room chock full of incredible, talented people, like some of the guys standing right in front of me, right? Big futures, big, fat, beautiful futures. Oh, I'd love to be your age. I'd pay you a lot of money to be your age. But we have some tremendously talented people in this room, including tremendously talented political people that have helped me right from the beginning. We had the safest border in the history of our country. We built 571 miles of wall. We had Mexico supply us with 28,000 soldiers because we wanted them, that's why. And they said, we won't do that. I said, yes, you will, you will. And in the end, they did. It was an easy negotiation, but we had the safest border, the best numbers we've ever had, and now we have the worst numbers probably in the history of the world. It's sad to see what's happening to our cities. Our cities are being overrun with migrant crime, and that's Biden migrant crime. But it's a new category of crime, and it's violent, where they'll stand in the middle of a street and have fistfights with police officers, and if they did that in their countries from where they came, they'd be killed instantly. They wouldn't do that. So the world is laughing at us. The world is taking advantage of us. 3 years ago, we were at a level, we were energy independent. We were going to be very shortly energy dominant, and today we're getting oil from Venezuela. Can you believe it? And we're doing numbers on that oil. You know what we're doing? We're refining the oil. We have our refinery for that oil. It's really, I call it tar. It's not oil. It's terrible. We have real stuff. But we're refining it in Houston. So for all of the environmentalists, you ought to look at that, because all of that tar is going right up into the atmosphere. You just ought to take a look. It's the only plant that can do it. We have the only plants that can take tar and make it into oil, and that's what it is. It's a shame. But we were energy independent. We were going to be energy dominant. We were going to be supplying oil to Europe, all over the world, and then a tragic thing happened during the election. It was a tragedy, because you wouldn't have, think of it, all of the problems that you have today, I don't think you would have had any of them. You'd only have success, and that's what's ultimately going to unify this country and unify this party. We have a great Republican Party with tremendous talent, and we want to have unity, and we're going to have unity, and it's going to happen very quickly. And I've been saying lately, success will bring unity to our country, and it happened before. We had the best economy our country's ever had, and people were calling me that I would have said will never happen. It'll never happen. They wanted to get together African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, women, men, people with diplomas from the best schools in the world, and people that didn't graduate from high school. Every single group was doing better than ever before. And it was a beautiful thing. Our country was coming together. Our country was coming together. And now we have a very divided country. We have a country that a political person uses weaponization against his political opponent. Never happened here. It happens in other countries, but they're third world countries. And in some ways, we're a third world country. We're a third world country at our borders, and we're a third world country at our elections, and we have to stop that. We need a fair and free press. The press has not been fair, nor has it been free, but maybe someday they will be. They're being beaten up pretty badly. People aren't trusting them. They're not believing them. And really, it's a very important factor. The press used to be the policeman. It used to police our country. Now nobody has confidence in them. And we have to get that confidence back. It's so important for the success of our country. So important. So this has been a day that we've been waiting for. I want to thank my family for being here. It's a great family. I have a great family. They've had it very easy since I decided to run for politics. They say, thanks a lot, Dad, we appreciate it. But they're strong, and they're very capable people, and they love the country. They really do love the country, and we appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody, my staff, Susie, Chris, incredible job. Incredible job you're doing. I read an article yesterday where it said this is one of the finest run campaigns that anybody has ever seen. That's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. It's really a statement. And we have no choice.
Yeah, okay. You know, it is, okay. I will say that it is a decision that we revisit constantly in terms of the balance between allowing somebody to knowingly lie on your air about things they've lied about before and you can predict they're going to lie about, and so therefore it is just, it's irresponsible to allow them to do that. It's a balance between knowing that that's irresponsible to broadcast and also knowing that as the de facto, soon-to-be de facto nominee of the Republican Party, this is not only the man who is likely to be the Republican candidate for president, but this is the way he's running.
Well, here's how we'll balance it.
Yeah.
Why don't we fact check the hell out of him?
Yes, and we do that after the fact, and that is the best remedy that we've got. It does not fix the fact that we broadcast it.
But it's
honestly.
stunning that he's saying these things and people are hearing it. Let's just go through it, right? That we have the most devastating economy. Are you kidding me? We have had the best economic recovery of any country in the developed world. He's telling an audience right there, oh my goodness, the paltry oil production. We're producing more oil today than we ever have in the history of our country. Think about the American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure plan. We have created more jobs, 3.2 million more jobs than we had pre-pandemic. The problem that we do have is inflation. And so what Donald Trump does is prey upon the fact that people don't necessarily feel good and life's expensive. But when it comes to facts, here's something that's absolutely nonsensical and infuriating. When people's wages go up, they credit themselves. They say, I'm good at my job, I just got a raise. But when everything costs more, they blame the government.
Right.
And wages are up, which is a huge positive. And one of those reasons wages are up is all the union wins in the last 2 years. And remember, President Biden has stood with those unions.
The most pro-union president in American history.
Can I just give you 4 numbers? I just was literally Googling, and I just pulled up these 4 numbers. This is the gross domestic product in the country. In 2019, it was plus 2.3%. In 2020, it was negative 2.8%. That is the election year. That is the reason Donald Trump didn't get reelected. That was part of it. 2021, it was 5.9. And I was just going to say that. I was just going to say that. And 1.9 in 2022. Those 4 numbers. 2.3, negative 2.8, 5.9, and 1.9. There's one factor in all 4 of those, and Lawrence just said it. Donald Trump had one job. He had one crisis. He's saying, oh, all of these things were perfect. You had one crisis, bruh. It was called the pandemic. And you know what you did? You bollocksed it completely. You did so poorly at managing your sole crisis. The one hard thing you do, the reason he doesn't look old like Biden looks older, the presidency ages you when you do the job. Obama went gray because he was doing the work. Donald Trump looks the same as when he ran because he was playing golf the whole time. His one job
you think
was
that
to
hair
manage...
color's natural?
That too. But the reality is, he had one job: manage this crisis, and he messed it up so badly that they had to do the stimmy. People love the stimmy. Why did they have to do the stimmy? Because 1 million bodies are in the ground.
It was
because of how poorly he managed an airborne virus.
It was the Democratic plan to put forward the stimulus check. If you want to thank anyone in this country for it, it was Nancy Pelosi, and they got a few Democrats to sign, Republicans to sign on.
Right.
But Donald Trump was clever enough as the branding man to put his name on it.
But why did they have to have a stimmy? I mean, we have to keep going back to it because I do hear this a lot, particularly among this attempt to sort of pretend you're going to get black voters, is they run the stimmy game. But you have to ask the question Plies asked. We don't have Ari on the stage, so I'm going to play the part of Ari. Let's ask the question that hip-hop artist Plies asked. Why did you have to have a stimmy, man? Because you messed up the pandemic so badly that the economy crashed. It cratered. It went into negative GDP. People were literally unable to work, unable to earn money, unable to literally survive economically. People were going to literally lose their homes, their apartments, everything. You had everyone locked in the house. And the only thing that you could do was do massive government spending, which is a Democratic thing.
Which is one of the reasons we're dealing with inflation.
Yes.
Which is sort of a necessary evil that got us out of the devastation that we're in. But one of the reasons the stock market is doing so well, not Donald Trump, because traders think you're going to win, is because we didn't have a hard landing.
Yes.
We didn't have a crash.
We had the best post-COVID economic recovery of any major country in the world.
5.9% GDP in 2021. That's Biden.
There is a tactical approach that television news could try here because we know what's coming. You could give him half the screen, and you could pre-write this scroll that you could just keep rolling by.
Stuff you know he's going to lie about?
That says America is producing more oil than any other country on Earth and the most in history. That the economy is stronger than it has ever been. It is bigger than it has ever been. The stock market is at an all-time high. You could just
Mar-a-Lago isn't a room full of celebrities right now.
Right. But you could just plug in those things and run them, because he's going to say all this stuff repeatedly, and just put it there right beside him on the screen while he's saying it, because they are the same lies over and over again. Cities are overrun with crime. Crime is down. Put in the FBI.
Violent crime is at a 50-year low.
50-year low. Unemployment is at a 50-year low. You just plug them in and just roll his speech and just let those things cycle by while he's talking.
It's more than just crime is down. I mean, last week NBC News came out with a study that said in the cities that have received the most migrants,
Yes.
crime is down. The DOJ has a report. In the cities that have received the most migrants, there is no homicide rates, robbery. There's no there. Biden migrant crime is going to be, that's his new line. And let's not forget the xenophobia inherent in all this, the racism that's inherent in all this. Not only is it incumbent upon the news media to correct the record, it is also incumbent upon the Biden administration.
Yes.
Because thus far, they have really sort of played footsie with this narrative that there is a problem with our immigration system. It, of course, needs to be fixed. Immigrants are also central to the American economy, and they are not, they are not single-handedly the cause of fentanyl coming over the border. They are not all criminals. They are not laying waste to the American project. And it is incumbent upon all of us who care about the truth on Earth One to push back and correct the record on a group of people that has been maligned in spectacular fashion.
And by the way, if you want to do another chart of when you saw the spike in border crossings, because it was down to record numbers under George W. Bush and President Obama. It spiked again because of COVID. COVID is the spike again. You just look at the chart. All of these crises that Donald Trump inherited a strong, growing economy and managed to ruin it by messing up his one crisis, which was COVID, which is why the border went crazy. It's why inflation went crazy. All of those crises Joe Biden has had to fix. Joe Biden's job creation rate is second only to Bill Clinton. He's not only fixed it, he's actually been more successful as a domestic policy president than any modern president. All of the things Donald Trump is trying to take credit for on the campaign trail are Biden things. And Biden needs to run out there and take credit for it.
Well, the president has done a little bit of that while we have been talking. We just got a statement from President Biden on these Super Tuesday election results. May I read it to you?
Please.
Tonight's results leave the American people with a clear choice. Are we going to keep moving forward, or will we allow Donald Trump to drag us backwards into the chaos, division, and darkness that defined his term in office? 4 years ago, I ran because of the existential threat Donald Trump posed to the America we all believe in. Since then, we've made enormous progress. 15 million jobs, wages rising faster than inflation, taking on big pharma and the gun lobby, and winning. But we have more to do. If Donald Trump returns to the White House, all of this progress is at risk. He's driven by grievance and grift, focused on his own revenge and retribution, not the American people. He's determined to destroy our democracy, rip away fundamental freedoms like the ability for women to make their own health care decisions, and pass another round of billions of dollars in tax cuts for the wealthy. And he'll do or say anything to put himself in power. Today, millions of voters across the country made their voices heard, showing that they are ready to fight back against Donald Trump's extreme plan to take us backwards. My message to the country is this: every generation of Americans will face a moment when it has to defend democracy. Stand up for our personal freedom. Stand up for the right to vote and our civil rights. To every Democrat, Republican, and Independent who believes in a free and fair America, this is our moment. This is our fight. Together, we will win. Statement from President Biden tonight on the Super Tuesday election results, making some of the case that y'all were just saying that he needed to be making. 15 million jobs, wages rising faster than inflation, taking on big pharma, taking on the gun lobby, and winning.
But why does the president have to tell people every single thing he's done economically? Can I just give a couple examples?
Yeah.
If I had my student loans forgiven, I would know that. I'd be happy about it, right? If junk fees are are no longer an issue for me. That's great news. Just today, it hasn't been enacted, but the White House announced that they're going to cap credit card fees. These are things that impact people every day of the week, and it is stunning to me how many still don't credit the administration for it. When your drug prices just got renegotiated, and that has not happened in decades. Joe Biden was trying to do that when he was in the Senate 20 years ago. So yes, we, like everybody else, rightfully say, man, this White House has to get their messaging down. But the American people also have to realize, holy cow, look at all these great things that have just happened for me. Did they think that happened out of thin air?
Right. Yeah.
Yes, they do. That's the problem.
Everybody personalizes
for example,
the benefits.
When those credit card bank fees, when that kicks in, no one's going to look. I mean, the people who need to look at that statement and go, oh, Joe Biden did that. They're not going to have any idea who did that. They won't know.
No.
But
People don't know. They don't have government work. I mean, we have a crisis of civics in this country. People actually don't know how these things change. And there is a sort of, there's a systematic problem that politics, we talked about this before, is broken because the connection between politics and the things that happen in my life has been severed. People think when things go wrong, they look at the quarterback on the team, like they do in football, right? When the team wins, the quarterback gets the credit. And when they lose, the quarterback gets the blame. So the things that hurt them, the things that make it harder to afford your life, they blame Biden. But the things that help, they think, as you said, I did great at my job, I did this, I created, I got a raise. But there isn't a connection between the way that the government actually functions, which is what Democrats are good at, and the way you feel, which is what Republicans are good at.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, the Democratic message for Joe Biden is as simple as it is positive, right? It's the best jobs market since the 1960s. Markets are at record highs. Inflation doing better than every other major country in the world is dealing with inflation. COVID recovery better than every other major country in the world dealing with the COVID recovery. Drug prices, progress. Wages, progress. Most people with health insurance in this country we have ever had. It's simple.
Gas prices, progress. Right. Oil production.
Oil, exactly. I mean, there aren't very many things that you can talk about in terms of the economic, measurements that mean things to people on which Biden doesn't have bragging rights. The question is how the volume of their bragging is set and whether people are willing to listen to the White House and listen to Democrats and listen to the campaign when they say, hey, everything that's getting better is getting better in part because of Joe Biden policies that were designed to make it better. That lesson, that disconnect that you're talking about in terms of our politics being disconnected from our feelings about how the country is going, that's a Democratic project to fix it. And I firmly believe, I keep saying this, and I think I'm boring people with it, but I firmly believe the message is practical, popular policies. We want to do normal stuff. And they are talking, literally, Donald Trump is hosting Hungarian dictator Viktor Orban at Mar-a-Lago on Friday. And they're talking about building camps for millions of people. Right? I mean, that's the kind of stuff that they're talking about doing. Building camps for millions of people. Oh, and invading Mexico. Oh, and putting the U.S. Army with live ammunition in the streets of the United States to shoot American citizens.
And they can do that, Rachel, because their voters don't vote on the economy. I mean, I think we just have to accept.
Everybody keeps telling us that they do. That
their voters
don't. Economic dislocation that explains the Trump
vote. The people who are the most economically sensitive are younger people. Older people have savings. They've got a house that's got equity. They've got money. The people who vote for Donald Trump aren't the poor. They're people who have money. Whether they have a college degree or not, they're fine economically. The economically sensitive people are young people who can't pay their rent. They're young people who can't pay their student loans. That's called a Democrat. Young people are more often people of color. They're more economically sensitive, and they also have super high expectations. These young people, their first president, a lot of them, was Obama. So they expect a lot. They have high expectations to love and like the president. And they also are super sensitive economically. When things go a little wrong, it goes really wrong for them. So Biden has to speak to people who do vote economically. Trump can just speak to people who are feelings people.
And
all
really
they care about is how they feel.
Do vote Republican because they know that their taxes aren't going to go up. They know that President Biden did not chit-chat with the CEO community, right? And
he walked the picket line with the UAW. He didn't. Yes, that's right.
And
that's
even though Donald Trump speaks at his rallies to the masses, remember, he walks into Mar-a-Lago and says, look at the stock market.
That's right.
Your taxes are going to go down. So you have to remember that. Think about Mitch McConnell today was just complimenting Kirsten Sinema, of all people, because what did she do? Protected carried interest. And that really wealthy class sits there worried, what could Joe Biden, I don't have Joe Biden in my pocket in a way that they would like to. Democrats are a risk for them economically.
Kirsten Sinema, we haven't talked about her tonight. She's not running for re-election. It is amazing to all that effort and all the people, all the man hours it took from all the different people to become the first Arizona senator in a generation to get in there so that you could do the carried interest loophole and block efforts to make prescription drugs cheaper and to make sure the minimum wage didn't go up. I mean, that's what her legacy is in the Senate. And Republicans are like, wow, that was really our kind of Democrat. It's a real shame to lose Kirsten Sinema. It's just, all it did was make the math bad for a long time in terms of trying to count votes on anything. But yeah, Kirsten Sinema is out. She's likely to be replaced by a Democrat who votes like a Democrat in the Arizona Senate. We should go over to Steve Kornacki because looking over his shoulder, it appears that something is happening in Vermont.
Yeah, we're up to, 87% here, but we've been talking all night in this Vermont race about when the city of Burlington, the biggest in Vermont, would report. Burlington has come in as expected here. It's about 1,000 vote margin, just shy of that for Haley. A margin of about 43 points there for her. So between Burlington and South Burlington, by Vermont standards, Haley just netted a lot of votes, enough now to expand that lead statewide north of 2,500 votes. That accounts for, equates to more than 4 percentage points, 4.1. This is Vermont, as we keep saying, small towns. I'm going to show you just a couple small towns here, at least one where we are waiting for results that should be very favorable to Nikki Haley. Woodstock, Vermont. If you ever been there, a bit of a destination town, demographics that are favorable to Nikki Haley. You got Plymouth, you got old Calvin Coolidge's hometown we're still waiting on as well. But overall, again, Haley now putting some distance between herself and Trump. And I've been saying, not only would you rather be Haley than Trump in Vermont with these kinds of numbers and what's left to come and what we see on the map here, but I think the suspense now is coming down to, in Vermont, these 17 delegates, because Haley, to get all 17, has to finish above 50.0%. You need an outright majority to get all of them. Right now, that would be just enough for her to get all 17. If she were to keep that and go even higher, she gets them all. If she were to win but fall to, let's say, 49.9%, suddenly she has to split that delegate pool. So for Haley, it's looking like a question right now. We'll see. Trump could stage a late rally here, but I think the most likely scenario for Haley is a question of, is she going to go 17-0, or is she going to go 9-8 in the delegate count? But again, to put that in some perspective, overall, that Vermont delegate math is going to go into this national delegate math. And you can see here in the grand scheme of things, what she's really looking for tonight, Haley, I think, is just she wants to be able, I think, at this point, to be able to say she got at least one state. And that state that she could get is Vermont.
So, you know how, Alex, you were saying earlier that you wouldn't have expected that, like, the cliffhanger tonight, the thing we're going to be checking in on over and over and over again was going to be
all night long.
I'm going to beat that. I have something.
More Mariana Islands?
No, it is not the Mariana Islands, but good guess.
Thank you.
All right, so do you remember in 2020, we had a big, very vital Democratic presidential primary.
Yeah.
You might remember that a man named Joe Biden ended up winning.
Right.
But there was, there was a lot of people running. There was some Elizabeth Warren. There was some Kamala Harris. There was
Michael Bloomberg.
There was, right.
Oh.
So in 2020, when American Samoa held its Democratic caucus, who won?
Mike Bloomberg.
Mike Bloomberg won the American Samoa Democratic Caucus. Who came in second?
I don't know.
Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh, my God.
Okay.
Wow.
So American Samoa has obviously been a bellwether for Democratic politics
clearly.
for a long time now. In recent days, if you had been following political news in American Samoa, you would have noted that there was a Democrat campaigning heavily for the American Samoa caucus results in recent days, campaigning heavily. He's a person named Jason Palmer.
You know Jason.
Jason Palmer is a venture capitalist.
JP?
He was on the ballot in New Hampshire. He got 130 votes. He was on the ballot in Nevada. He got 512 votes. Okay. And tonight, NBC News can now project that the winner. Yeah, there he is.
Wow.
The winner of the Democratic presidential contest in American Samoa is that person.
Wow.
Jason Palmer. The total number of votes cast, do the math right now, you guys can do it. Total number of votes cast in the American Samoa caucus, 91.
Wow. Is it just because he wanted to campaign in American Samoa?
40 of them went to Joe Biden, 51 of them went to Jason Palmer, and that's enough. He wins the American Samoa.
I think we could guess. Mike Bloomberg won American Samoa. What does Mike Bloomberg have? A whole heck of a lot of money. A venture capitalist runs there. What does he likely have?
A whole bunch of money.
And you know, some billionaires and even fake billionaires get fake Time magazine covers made with themselves to put up like in gilt frames on the walls of their golf houses.
You can get that
at the
amusement
American
parks,
Samoa caucus.
You have maybe as much of an argument for staying in this race as Nikki Haley. I'm sorry, is that too low of a blow? But
No,
it does.
it's accurate.
The Vermont thing, Washington, D.C. and Vermont, they're not American Samoa, right? But the big sort of question is, what next, Nikki Haley, right?
Nikki Haley is staying in the race to keep Republican arguments against Donald Trump alive.
And because what else has she got to do?
I mean,
that's a very practical point.
And listen, because she has the money, why leave?
Yeah.
She has the money. The question beyond, like, where are Nikki Haley voters going to go? It's where are Nikki Haley donors going to go? Because she has huge ones. And from my reporting, nowhere. They're happy to give her money because she's sort of this great hope for them of kind of getting back to this George Bush Republican. But when she's out, so are they. And they will begrudgingly vote for Joe Biden, but they're not going to give him a big check, or they'll secretly and not admit it vote for Donald Trump. But you're not going to see them writing big checks because they're writing that no labels type of check for Nikki Haley, thinking there's a chance.
Does Biden have an in with them, though? Could Biden make a play for that money?
For the money, not so much. For the votes, yes. I mean, I think I said it when we were talking to South Carolina. It was a Fortune 500 CEO said to me, because they were kind of arguing, Joe Biden's not pro-business. And I said, what are you talking about? But he said, you can judge him by his agenda. And he does not spend a lot of time with the CEO set. And he doesn't have to follow what... It's an ego squad. I'm not defending it, but that's how they roll.
He doesn't golf with me.
I'm not saying they're right, but I'm saying it's how they feel. And so he could get their support in terms of their votes. But if you think about where their checks are going, they're likely going to go to down ballot races because they ridiculously love gridlock. They don't want one party to control things, and they want to either help moderate Republicans hold their seat that are facing far-right challengers, or they maybe want to just make sure we get this do-nothing gridlock status quo.
I think the most important choreography of this election cycle is potentially the exit choreography, Nikki Haley, and what she does, if anything, to throw her supporters over to the Biden camp, right?
What is the overt? You keep asking why is she still in? Why is she still in? Why is she still in? Why should she leave?
You know, I think the harshest critic of Nikki Haley's criticism of Donald Trump, just because he is a poison to the Republican Party. He is destroying the party from within. And to eradicate the poison, and I think her wording, her criticism has gotten sharper in like the closing hours of her campaign, but is she really attacking the problem in the way that it needs to be attacked? Because just sort of like, you know, saying chaos follows him rightly or wrongly, is that the long-term strategy to stop the cancer? I'm not sure. I mean, if her bid is 2028 and the ashes of the Republican Party rebuilding it, I mean, Trumpism has a long tail. And if this is the best shot at you know, ending its reign of terror, I'm not that convinced that it's.
But once she gets out, there's not going to be any voice
and she's
in the Republican Party criticizing him at all.
And she's also doing very well. She said after Michigan, she reminded people that Donald Trump has been campaigning in Michigan for 8 years. She showed up a couple of times over a few months and got 20+% of the vote. You don't leave the bar until you're out of money and can't afford drinks. She's still got money.
We've got a call to make. Following the decision desk to the great state of Vermont, the Green Mountain State.
There you go.
There you got it.
She's still at the bar.
In the Republican presidential contest in the great state of Vermont, famous for all sorts of things, including really, really, really excellent beer. It is now also famous as the first state that has been won by Nikki Haley. In the 2024 Republican presidential nominating contest so far, it is the District of Columbia and the state of Vermont that have been won by Nikki Haley. As you see there, at least right now, with 93% of the vote in, we'll check in on this with Steve, but she's over the 50% threshold, which means not only has she won the state, but she'll win every delegate in the state as well. Although I am speaking off the cuff there, I'm just talking about what I have learned from Steve Kornacki tonight. Is that seem to be the case?
So, yeah, right now, we don't know. You can see with that call, Nikki Haley is now projected by her decision desk to get at least 9 delegates, delegates out of Vermont. 9 would be, you know, if she falls under 50, it's proportional. So if she falls under 50, this is a very even race, and she would have the 1 extra delegate to Trump. It would be 9 for Haley, 8 for Trump. The other 8 remain unassigned because if she does finish over 50, she'll get the additional 8 and win this 17-0. So it is a question right now of whether Haley will win this state 17-0 in the delegate count or whether it will be 9-8. And you can see now she has, the last time we checked in, it was about 2,500 votes. It's expanded further. It's over 3,000 votes right now. And again, we're ticking our way into the mid-90s in terms of vote percentage in. And, you know, you just don't see what we've seen here are some of the higher, and this is all I keep saying by Vermont standards, some of the higher population, the city of Burlington and some of the higher population towns that have come in the last 20 minutes or so that are just very favorable to Haley. And so when you see 3,000 votes statewide, you know, it translates here into 4.5 points, and that number has ticked up. It was 50.1 the last time we checked, 50.3. I think there's a decent chance here that she's built enough of a pad, and there are a couple of towns here I could point to that are remaining. You know, they could help her retain that 50.3 and maybe even build on it. But there is a possibility with these remaining towns in Vermont as they come in, and we'll see if it's a really slow process to get them all counted out because it's a very diffuse process of getting the vote counted in Vermont. If Trump is able to perform well enough in some of them to tug that number for Haley down under the 50% mark, in which case it would be 9-8 for the delegate. So she gets the win statewide, and to the extent her campaign wanted to be able to tout a win tonight, it's been clear for a while Vermont was really their only shot. They will be able to say they got a win in Vermont. Will they get a sweep in the delegates? Will they split them? That remains to be seen, but you can see that in the context of tonight. That is subtle distinctions here in the color, but the dark red is Haley's color, so that lights up in her color. All the other red from tonight's states that's come in has been Trump's shade of red, and this is now where the overall Republican delegate race stands. And by the way, if you just kind of play this out based on what's remaining delegate-wise, Trump right now is on course to finish the night over 1,000 delegates on the Republican side. And we just did the math. If you cumulatively add up all of the votes that have been cast in Super Tuesday contests, say, on the Republican side, Haley is getting 25% of the vote collectively across all of these states. So it's a worthwhile metric because her campaign has really been leaning on this 40% idea. It's been the heart of her stump speech the last few weeks. There's 40% who won't vote for Trump in these primaries. Tonight, that number across all these states is 25 cumulatively.
So let me just underscore that, Steve. 25%, if you add all the states that have voted thus far, the popular vote in all of those states, not looking at like the proportion of delegates or anything, you're saying of the number of people turning out in Republican primaries, she's getting in total a quarter of them.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to have poll closings at the top of the hour. Lots still to come. But Nikki Haley has won a state tonight. She has won the state of Vermont. And what was that guy's name? Jason Palmer has won the Democratic caucus in American Samoa. And that's news you can use. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our special coverage of Super Tuesday. I want to go right now to NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff, who is at the Orange County Registrar's office in California. Last time we saw him, we were protecting him from carjacking allegations, but now he's back inside. Yes, Jacob.
Rachel, I'm lucky enough to be joined by the Registrar, Bob Page. Mr. Page, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. So when the polls close in 3 minutes and 15 seconds, the first thing that's going to happen, this is the tabulation room, as everybody can see on the sign behind you, is you all are going to push a button, and something's going to change on this screen. What are we going to see in real time when that happens?
So we're going to run, the voting system will run a tabulation report so that we can for every contest on the ballot, be able to report out what candidates got how many votes.
So is that, we're talking immediately, so and those are unofficial results, or are those official results?
It's unofficial until we certify the election in a few weeks.
And just to clarify for the viewers at home and across the country, that could be up to what, is it 28 days the state gives California counties to certify the results of the election? So if it's close, particularly in the Senate race, we could be waiting a while.
Yeah, well, like for the U.S. Senate race, obviously you'll need to look at the Secretary of State's website for the results, because they'll combine all the counties' results together. Our results will just be Orange County's.
While I have you, I want to ask you, on the sign-in sheet, when we walked in for security purposes, ahead of me on the sign-in sheet was a name of somebody, and it said the Department of Homeland Security. I know you guys have task force, you have interagency sort of cooperation in terms of interference with the election to protect from that. Is there any indication on a federal level or a state level there was any sort of interference or attempted interference in the election this time around?
Nothing out of the ordinary. We'll typically monitor attempts for people around the world trying to access people's websites, but no serious threats or anything like that.
Okay, I'm going to let you get back to your job, because you have 1 minute and 50 seconds, I think, before the polls close. So you go back in the tabulation room. Thank you, and we'll check in with you in just a little bit. Rachel, that is the man of the hour, Bob Page, the registrar here in Orange County, California. There's a lot more to show you, but I'll let the polls close, and we'll talk about it after that.
I'm sorry that I said the carjacking thing that I get you in trouble.
No, it's okay. He did. There are a lot of sheriff's deputies around here. In fact, here's one right here. I didn't carjack. She was saying, did I carjack? I haven't carjacked. I just wanted to make that clear. She's like, okay, fine.
I meant it in a very colloquial, conversational sense. Like you were making friends through car windows with people who weren't actually stopping their cars. They were only slowing down. It just looked carjacky.
I go by Jack. Sometimes it's Jack, Jacob. It could be anything. Yeah.
Car Jacob. Yes, thank you very much, Jacob. I'm sorry again. Oh, man. That's a worrying thing. We are closing in on a poll closing in California. And as we have been talking about over the course of the night, there's a bunch of things to watch for in California. First of all, there's a whole bunch of congressional primaries, some of which might be really consequential. Some incumbents which may lose their jobs. There's a bunch of incumbents whose seats are becoming open, in part. Some of them are retiring, but some of them are running for other jobs. Those could switch parties. Those could create unusual results. California's primaries are also a jungle primary system where it doesn't matter what party you're in. If you finish in the top two, you ascend to the general election in November. We are expecting presidential results now as the polls close, but also, crucially, Democratic Senate primary results. In the Senate race that's vacated by the late Senator Dianne Feinstein, powerhouse Democrats from the House of Representatives who are competing against one another to try to win Dianne Feinstein's Senate seat, and we'll expect to get the first projection of those results right now. The decision desk tells us that in California, in the presidential race on the Republican side, the projected winner is former President Donald Trump. In the California presidential contest on the Democratic side, the projected winner is President Joe Biden. Now, in terms of what we're going to show us next, wait with me here. Here we go. The California Senate primary on the Democratic, not on the Democratic side, forgive me, as I was just explaining. The Senate primary in California is what they call a jungle primary. It does not matter what party you are. The top two vote getters overall will move ahead to the general election. Right now, that race, the Senate primary in California, is too early to call. Is there anything else, control room, that I can say about that Senate primary? We'll come back to that in just a moment. We do have one additional projection in Utah, in the Republican caucus in Utah. It is too early to call between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. And I just want to ask the control room for clarity here. Again, these decision desk projections are not our own. The decision desk is airlocked apart from us, and we don't influence what they say. They're not aware what we're saying about them. But we've got Steve Garvey and Adam Schiff there as pictures, along with the formal projection from NBC News that it is too early to call. Obviously, there's a ton of people in this primary. Why are we showing the pictures of Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey? Is that relevant, or is that just window dressing? There we go. Too early to call. That's a better representation of what we're looking at here. Thank you. I appreciate it. Adam Schiff, Steve Garvey, Katie Porter, Barbara Lee, and other candidates as well, who are all competing in the California U.S. Senate primary, where, again, it is too early to call. Don't read anything into the fact that we showed the picture of those two candidates who are in the upper left of your screen. It was not representational as to what way this is too early to call. And I just wanted to make sure we clarified that. Did I clarify that right?
Yeah, you did that very well.
Very important clarification.
I thought we were getting a message as well.
Yes.
But we were not.
No.
So thank you for doing that.
Okay, now I'm done. That's all I can do. Right now, Chris Hayes, I wanted to ask you, since you have rejoined us, we have since had the news that Nikki Haley has won the Vermont Republican presidential primary. I want to shout out our friend Steve Kornacki, who at the very, very, very outset of this Republican presidential primary said, you know, looking at the demographics and the kinds of voters that seem to be attracted to each of these candidates, I'm going to say that it looks like Nikki Haley could win D.C., maybe Vermont. He said exactly those things, and we have now seen Nikki Haley win D.C. and Vermont, but no additional contests. How does that make you feel about this overall debate that we've been having here on set tonight and that you've been heard so much of in the media recently about Nikki Haley's raison d'etre?
I mean, I guess there's sort of an external question about why she's doing it and an internal one. I can't speak to the latter, right? I mean, I think that the point is that you run until you can't anymore. The thing that makes her different than most is that I think she could continue to fund her campaign because of the intensity here. And I think this sort of intensity versus breadth question is actually a really useful analytical one to think about with respect to Donald Trump. And it goes like this. There are people out there, and there's lots of them, who will crawl over broken glass to vote against Donald Trump. You throw them on any ballot, they will hitchhike across America to do it. They will ford a river. They will climb a mountain. They will go anywhere to vote against this man. Some of those people are, you know, traditionally liberals, and they've been lifelong Democrats. Some of those people used to call themselves Republicans. And in fact, some of the people that are the most sort of like invested in stopping him are people that, you know, even rather recently called themselves Republicans. I know a lot of them. We all know a lot of them.
Michael Steele still calls himself a Republican.
Yeah, he does.
So you've got this. So what we've seen, and I think this sort of actually kind of cascades out, right? So this is true of a lot of the people in the larger, I would say, center-left pro-democracy majority. We see it in special election after special election after special election where people will show up because they view him as such a threat, and because they view the Republican Party under his aegis as such a threat. Nikki Haley occupies an interesting position right now as this sort of, she is receiving that energy and is being channeled into her in a way that breaks the normal rules for how this goes. Because the normal rules for how this goes is if once it becomes clear you can't win, all the energy goes away and the donors dry up and you got nothing to do. You don't get to make the choice if you keep running. There's nothing to do. No one's funding your campaign. They unplug the telephones.
You can't put gas in the plane.
Right. But what we are seeing with her, and one of the things I think Steve has been talking about, this sort of like keeping these analytical categories clear in our head, is like there is this almost unprecedented group of Americans that are just so opposed to Donald Trump and what he represents to the future of the country. They produce this kind of like incredible heat of activity that is right now sort of finding its locus in her. I think not because necessarily who she is, but because what she represents in this context. And I think that makes it possible for her to sort of defy the normal gravity.
I talk to a lot of those donors, and really, they don't want to officially turn the light off and say, this is the party of Trump, right? You can give them example after example, and they still want to desperately believe their Republican Party, even if there's ultimately a dead end, there's hope for it. And she's still young, and there's all this optimism and money behind her right now. And so it's why she's staying in. But if you look at Donald Trump, right, state after state, he's losing 30% of the vote to her. That's a really big number. Even if she's not getting the delegates, this is not a party united. Right. Whereas, yes, are people getting worried about the uncommitted voters for Joe Biden? They're just uncommitted. They're raising a flashlight to Joe Biden, right? Think about it. Listen to Michigan. Was that group of uncommitted voters? They're not saying never Biden's. They're saying, listen to us if you want our vote in November.
That's right. They're trying to change his policy.
Can I say one thing, though? It's not that Nikki Haley Haley is just criticizing Donald Trump. She's criticizing Joe Biden, probably as much, if not more. The only thing that matters in terms of stopping Donald Trump is whether Nikki Haley can give some votes to Joe Biden. Nikki Haley's not going to stop Donald Trump. Nikki Haley is out there trashing Joe Biden.
Yeah, she's not looking to save the world.
Wait. We're talking about the utility of her campaign.
Yes, right.
Right? It's
From the
not
perspective of the Biden campaign.
Right. Why is she in it?
Right.
If she's in there to truly stop the stop Donald Trump, right? If that's what we can assume. Her work is to stop Donald Trump. And
she's in it for her own success.
Okay, fine. If she's in it for her own success, does she think that the criticism she's leveling at Donald Trump is sufficient to actually have the Republican Party turn the page if he loses in November? And I would argue,
MAGA crowd, absolutely not.
But he has taken over the party. And I think if you really are looking at the long-term or medium-term prospects for the party, you got to have someone in there who's really going to be challenging
Can I
him.
say one more thing just from the perspective of, again, how you're reading this of the Biden campaign and what calculations you want to make? I mean, it's striking to me that what they have said from even last, I guess it was after South Carolina, where they're like, they want a forced choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Like they very much.
The Biden campaign.
Yes, the Biden campaign wants it to be a forced choice between two individuals, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. They don't talk about Nikki Haley. She doesn't exist in the world of statements they make. They sure as heck are not going to talk about anyone else who might be floating around the ballot in various states. To them, the key to them getting back to 50+1 and recreating the majority coalition they put together in 2020 is that it be a starkly binary choice. That it be a forced choice between two men, the two men that we keep putting up on our screen tonight, and that is their calculation of a key part.
So do you think, under the construct that you just described a moment ago, do you think that Nikki Haley being a sink for some of that anti-Trump heat is hurting the Biden campaign because it means that Republicans who are repulsed by Trump, and there are some, are not yet, and maybe never, will move their energies to Donald Trump, to Joe Biden, which is the only way to actually stop Donald Trump?
I think a lot of that depends on what develops. I really do think it matters what she does. Because I think at the end of all this, after being that sort of heat sink, and after getting the people who are coming out across the country, when they're coming, a lot of them are coming out of you not because they're longtime Nikki Haley stans. We all know that, right? So the question becomes, what do you do with that energy that you've gotten, and what do you reflect back when you make whatever decision you make, or when you go up to the convention with your delegates and make your stand? The question is what is the messaging about that forced choice? Because again, that forced choice is going to be that forced choice, barring some development.
Exactly what she's going to do. Go to the Yellowstone Club in Montana, the most expensive ski resort in the country, and give a speech for $1 million to support.
That doesn't help. I don't think that helps either way, though.
It doesn't. But her minimum price of the ticket to entry is that she's got to keep criticizing Biden. Just as a pragmatic thing, she's a Republican, and so for her minimum price of entry is to keep criticizing Biden. And I don't think the Biden people necessarily care.
But if she turns around and endorses Trump, I think it's
that would be the end of that.
Materially and marginally bad. That's actually more than delaying the inevitable.
She was asked by our very own Kristen Welker this Sunday, would she endorse Trump, which she, pledged on stage to do as a Republican primary candidate, and didn't really answer the question.
She hasn't answered.
And that'll be that answer to that question will be how Nikki Haley goes down in history, and whether or not she helps or hurts the Republic.
When she joins 3 corporate boards, she's going to say, "I'm not allowed to comment."
Exactly right.
While we have been talking and having this excellent conversation along these lines, I believe we've just got in a whole ton of vote in California. Is that right, Steve? Now, the reason we're looking at California is not because of the presidential race, which already has projected winners in both the Republican and Democratic side, but it's really because of that California U.S. Senate primary.
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to show this, though, because we did call this off the exit poll. We do have votes coming in that are consistent in this Republican primary with the exit poll. So that's what the exit poll was showing, something like this. That's why it was called without any votes. And you can just see what's coming in now is confirming that. But what's happening in California, I'll call that Senate race up. What's happening in California and how this vote's going to be reported out is they have all of that early voting, all of that vote by mail in California. And these counties can begin, Jacob was just showing you, they can press a button when these polls close, and they can get a whole bunch of the vote that was cast before Election Day. They can get it tabulated and reported out right away. So you're going to see in county after county this hour, they're going to start lighting up. And what you're going to see, I'll show you, Orange County, we've already got in one fell swoop half the vote. In Orange County, big, massive Southern California county here, Orange County, we've got half the vote in. And so here's an interesting, Katie Porter, of course, from this region of the state. And you can see if we can, there you go, we can go down, and you can see Barbara Lee, of course, representing Northern California in the House. This is not her natural political territory. But, Garvey, the main, most prominent Republican candidate in this race. So to the extent there is a Republican vote out there, this suggests he's going to be gobbling up that Republican vote here. And then you can see Adam Schiff running in second here in Orange County. Katie Porter about 3 points behind him. And then everybody else here well into single digits. And that is half the vote in Orange County. Sonoma County up north also coming in here. Very Democratic county here. Adam Schiff with 35. About a third of the vote in Sonoma County comes in right away. Schiff jumps to a big lead. Porter in second. And you can see Garvey here, the Republican candidate, just behind Katie Porter. And again, getting closer to Barbara Lee's political turf here, and she's still running under 10% here. That's some very discouraging early signs for Barbara Lee in those votes. We're also now getting into the Sierras here. And okay, again now about half the vote coming in. They had some big snow here in the last couple of days, but about half the vote coming in. Steve Garvey, first place here, again, corralling that Republican vote. Schiff running behind him. And boy, just look at the gap there to Katie Porter. And again, look at the gap much further back to Barbara Lee. So you start to add this together, just these three counties we've gotten so far, more than 5% of the statewide vote now has been recorded. And again, I expect these counties to be continually lighting up in the next several minutes. But while we're in a bit of a lull here, potentially for a second, I'll just explain that from this point forward in a lot of these counties, again, go back to Orange County here, we get a huge, massive chunk. The vote counting after this first hour or so in a lot of these counties gets very slow. Some of them you'll get more, you'll get a considerable amount overnight, but a lot of them we're talking about not getting a significant chunk more until tomorrow, 2 days from now, a week from now. If you remember back in the 2022 midterms, control of the House of Representatives was actually called by a California district. It was the 27th district, which is in the outer reaches of Los Angeles County. That was called for Republican Mike Garcia. It gave Republicans their 218th seat. When was that race called? It was called 8 days after Election Day, and there were still other California districts at that point that were uncalled. So I think the thing to keep in mind here with California and these results as they come in the next hour, which are going to be very, very fascinating, is it takes something fairly decisive in the returns, for there to be a call tonight, because there's so much that will come in later. So again, Garvey, as the lone Republican, is he building a big, big number here, a big pad over third place? Would that allow this to, would it be clear in the next hour or so that Garvey will be in one of those two spots going into the general election? And just based on what Schiff is doing in these three counties so far that we've seen here, and again, a bit of a geographic range here as well in terms of what's coming in, would Schiff potentially, for that matter, if this continues in other counties, big if, but if it does, would there be enough there potentially for Schiff to be able to say, hey, Schiff and Garvey, maybe we're not sure of the order, but there's a big enough gap to third that it will be those two. If that's not clear tonight, it might be a while before that is clear. But again, there it is, about 6% from those three counties. And I was padding a little bit here because I was expecting a few more to light up. But I do think within the next few minutes, we're going to have a lot more. And by the end of this hour, we're going to have a ton of colored-in counties on this map.
Well, Steve, stand by with that. We're going to go live to somebody who's at Vote Processing Center in California. And I have a feeling if those votes come in while we are talking to Gadi, we'll come back to you and get an update. Joining us now from a ballot processing center in Los Angeles County is NBC News correspondent Gadi Schwartz. Gadi, what are you seeing? We're just talking with Steve about the speed of the vote, the expectation in terms of when we're going to see returns.
Yeah, we're a lot closer to the source, but we don't really have very many answers. We actually have some questions ourselves. So let me just paint the picture of where we are right now. This is the nerve center for the largest county in the country. This is Los Angeles County, the county's brand new voter ballot processing center. It used to be an old Fry's Electronics warehouse, and now you can see it is this just massive warehouse where they process all those ballots. We understand 5.7 million registered voters in LA County. All of them, or the ones with mailing addresses, got their ballots mailed to them. And now it's a matter of seeing how many of those ballots came back today or how many people voted. When those ballots start coming in from all the different polling sites, are going to be coming in through those doors, escorted from all across the county, from different sheriff's departments. There's even a helicopter that's going to be landing in the parking lot in a little bit. But when it comes to the numbers, we know that there have been a lot of ballots that have already been tabulated. Last election, there was something like 80% of the ballots came back for early voting. This thing is making us question what's going on here, just in terms of when the refresh button is going to be pressed. We're looking at the tally system. We know at 8 o'clock it looks like there was some sort of tabulation event. There's a number up there, 1.6 million. There's a number of ballots up there, 672,000. We don't know what those correspond to. We've asked somebody to come over and explain it to us, and so far we're waiting for a supervisor to come because the first person couldn't really explain it. But what we do know is that this is the airlock center. This is a place that is not connected to the internet. This is where all that tabulation happens. There's no cell phones allowed, and the people that go in here are cleared through an extra secure set of doors over there, and everyone is standing on that side of the wall as this is somewhat the calm before the storm. We're waiting for those ballots to come in. All the ballots that came in from same-day voting here in Los Angeles. This is where they will be sorted. They will be extracted. Then the signatures will be compared over there, and then those will go into the tabulation room. But the tabulation room, as we understand it, has already tabulated possibly the bulk of the votes that we're going to see out of Los Angeles County, because most of the ballots have been sent out mail-in, and many of them have been returned mail-in. So we know that earlier in the day it was something under 1 million that had already come back, and now we're just hoping for that refresh button, or hoping for that tabulation button to be pressed so that we can get some solid answers. We may get them a few seconds before Steve Kornacki, but I wouldn't be surprised if he has some sort of a crystal ball that goes straight into this room over here. Back to you guys.
Let me ask you, you mentioned that you're expecting some of the ballots to arrive by helicopter. Can I just ask why you're expecting
Catalina
that?
Island.
Who gets the privilege of getting Catalina Island? Oh, of course, rather than rowing it across.
Exactly. Yes, and that's apparently that's a place to be on election coverage. So if you guys want to send me to Catalina Island for the next one, I am all
Catalina wine mixer.
Oh, that is very, 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 very giving of you. Yes, very generous. Well done. Gotti Schwartz for us in Southern California. We are getting in more vote in California. Steve is polishing and tuning the aforementioned crystal ball. We're going to take a quick break and be back with more of those results right after this. Stay with us. As one of the top 2 candidates in the same primary in which everybody runs, the top 2 candidates will advance to the general election in November. Right now, Decision Desk tells us that NBC News can project that one of the 2 candidates that will advance to the general election in November will be Adam Schiff, current California congressman, former chair of the Intelligence Committee, major player in Trump impeachments and investigations. Adam Schiff will be in the general election. The question is who will be there with him, by which I mean against him. Congressman Schiff has spent campaign funds and energy and attention trying effectively to elevate Republican Steve Garvey, calculating that there's no chance any Republican can win in a statewide election in California. He'd rather run against a Republican who he's got much stronger differences with than run against fellow Democrats like well-known Democratic members of Congress, Katie Porter and Barbara Lee, who are also in the race. Now the question is, between Garvey, Porter, and Lee, which one of them is going to be joining Congressman Schiff this fall in the general? Steve, we're absorbing that call. That's interesting and important in the California Senate primary. Can you tell us anything about how we learned that, or what else we should be watching for in terms of who's going to get that number 2 slot? Yeah, I mean, like I said, it comes in pretty fast and furious this hour in California. And what's clear is, first of all, I mean, just look, the margin here for Schiff of 17% of the statewide vote is now counted in California. And look at that margin for Schiff. It's almost 80,000 votes ahead of Steve Garvey. But also look at the distance between Schiff and Katie Porter, or for that
that matter, Steve Garvey and Katie Porter. She's sitting there in third place, but at 189,000 votes. That's about 250,000 votes that Porter now lags behind Adam Schiff. And you go further down, there's Barbara Lee at 78,000. She's about 350,000 votes behind Adam Schiff. It's right now the geographical breadth of that strong Schiff performance, because California is such a big state, some very distinct regions. But I mean, just start here in Southern California. We showed you Orange County to start the night. This is where Katie, we're not sure if this is Katie Porter's, how much of Katie Porter's district is here, but her district is based in part in Orange County, and there's Schiff leading her there, even in what should be Katie Porter's really best part of the state. And we're waiting on Los Angeles County, as you just heard from that report from Gotti. You get into Schiff country there potentially, but let's see, that's going to be a huge chunk of vote that comes out. But then just start working your way up the coast here. San Luis Obispo County, more than half the vote. Schiff leads there. Garvey second. Look how far back it is to Katie Porter. Go into the Central Valley here. It's a more Republican-friendly area, but just start working your way through. You'll see Garvey leading. You'll see Schiff in second, distance to Katie Porter. Let's go to Fresno County. Garvey leading, Schiff in second, 20 points back to Katie Porter. So just working all the way through the Central Valley here, and that pattern remains. Now let's work our way into the Bay Area here. Here's Contra Costa County. 36% of the vote is in. Schiff running in first there. Very Democratic area, but Garvey corralling what Republican vote there is far back to Katie Porter. So, a Southern California-based congressman, Adam Schiff. Now we're up into the Bay Area. There is a Bay Area congresswoman in this race, Barbara Lee.
Just going to ask, yeah.
Lagging far behind here. Look, Solano County, 40% Schiff, 12% Porter. There's Barbara Lee at 10%. We're waiting here. Very small. We don't have anything from San Francisco County yet. That will be big in this area. We don't have anything from San Mateo County here, but you can zoom in. Look, just across from San Francisco, Marin County, very upscale area here. Schiff, big advantage. Far, far back to Katie Porter, though, again. So you just see this everywhere you're looking here, even when you go into the Sierra Nevadas here. Take a look at Placer County. We show you get a more Republican-friendly area here, but look at the distance between Schiff and Katie Porter. El Dorado County, I mean, same story everywhere here, and even get up to the very Republican areas in the far, far north of the state here. And again, you expect Garvey to do very well here, but even there, Schiff, it's distant, but Schiff second, and you just don't see the other two Democratic members of Congress. So again, now a quarter of the vote is in statewide. This lead that Schiff, there it is. You see the
got to interrupt you, Steve. Sorry. NBC News has now made a projection as to who the second candidate will be in the November general election against Adam Schiff, and it will be Republican Steve Garvey, the baseball player who hasn't run much of a campaign at all, was elevated within the Republican field, such as it is, by Adam Schiff, effectively singling him out as the candidate that he most wanted to run against in the November election. NBC now projects that the two top finishing candidates in the nonpartisan U.S. Senate primary in California will indeed be Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey. Just a remarkable result there. Steve, I don't want to let you go too far away from what you were just doing, and I have a special request if you don't mind. In the Bay Area, just east of the San Francisco Bay, Alameda County, that's the county where Barbara Lee would consider to be her home base, and I'm just wondering, I was wondering if she was coming in second there to Adam Schiff. She's a Alameda County congresswoman and beloved at home. Again, part of the tragedy here for Democrats is to have powerhouse, well-known, veteran, effective members of Congress like Barbara Lee and Katie Porter now not only not going to be on the ballot in the general election for this Senate seat, but out of the House of Representatives, having to give up their House seats in order to make this run that turned out to not be successful.
This is somewhat true in New York as well. You get these real traffic jams in the sort of progression of Democratic careers, because you've got states where when you get elected statewide office, you stick around a while in a state like New York, California, and there's not a lot of opportunities for openings, so people really jump at it when they happen.
If the description that we've been giving tonight about what Adam Schiff did here, picking sort of who he considers, I think, to be an unelectable Republican candidate to elevate during the primary to try to get that Republican into the general election. If that strategy sounds familiar to you, it's because you know the former Democratic senator from Missouri, Claire McCaskill, who famously pulled off that caper in one of her own successful bids for the United States Senate. She joins us now along with Obama White House Communications Director Jen Palmieri. Both of these women are co-hosts of the MSNBC podcast how to win 2024, and they both know how. Claire, I have to go to you first. You have been invoked. I imagine that you are cognizant here of the scheme that is at work that appears to be paying off tonight in California for Congressman Adam Schiff.
Yeah, I mean, what Adam Schiff did was just plain smart. There's nothing evil about it. He knew that Garvey was the preferred opponent. For one thing, it's no fun to attack Democrats. A little bit different than my situation. In fact, it's relatively risk-free for the values, I think, that all three of the Democratic candidates in this race shared. Because I think now we can safely call him just about almost Senator Adam Schiff. And that's a good thing for California, and it's a good thing for America. It's the sad thing, as you guys have mentioned, is we had three good candidates here, three great members of Congress, and that's always tough.
Yeah, and I want to know what the future is for Katie Porter and for Barbara Lee, because they're both such good communicators in particular about democratic values. Two totally different types of candidates and campaigners and politicians and legislators and lawmakers and leaders, very different in their personality and presentation, but both, I would say, remarkably effective communicators, especially on core values issues. And so I hope that Katie Porter and Barbara Lee are around democratic politics for a long time. Jen, let me go to you in terms of both this California Senate result, which we're just getting right now, but also what you've been watching over the course of the night.
I mean, that is a very big win by Adam Schiff. That's a big number. It happened quickly. I mean, it's an interesting thing. This will be the first time in over 30 years that a white man will represent California in the United States Senate, right? We had Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer in for a long time, Kamala Harris, Kevin De Leon now. So that's a big deal. And then overall, and I look at the exit polls, and particularly it was in California, Virginia, North Carolina, around 36% of Republicans, people voting in the Republican primary, saying they're not willing to guarantee that they will support the Republican nominee. You know, that tells me Trump still has a problem consolidating his support. And it's interesting because, you know, let's assume the New York Times poll from the other day was correct. That said that Trump was getting 93% of the vote that he had in 2020, yet still people voting, you know, somewhere between 20 and 40% of people voting in the Republican primary are not voting for him. So who are those people? You know, maybe they're independents, but they're people that are open to voting for Joe Biden. So I feel I'm coming out of this sort of primary season feeling more optimistic about Biden's room to grow and Trump hitting some kind of ceiling.
Jen, I have to give you the opportunity to say California Senator Alex Padilla, because Kevin De Leon ran for it but didn't get it.
Thank you so much, Senator Alex Padilla.
Yes, I knew you would want to say that, and I wanted to give you a chance before we got too far down the road.
Oh, that's so nice of you.
Claire, let me ask you about, I mean, the points that Jen was just making there in terms of the overall strength of the general election candidates in the presidential tonight and what we're learning about that from these primaries.
Hey, listen, I think the thing I take away from today is looking at the margins and deciding which party is really more united. In all the states that voted today, if you look at the results that we know right now, there was only 2 states where Biden won by less than 70 points. Okay? Everything else, 80%, 82%. You know how many states Donald Trump won by more than 70 points? 1, Alabama. So there are more people voting against Donald Trump than are even thinking about voting against Joe Biden. And I get the uncommitted is sending a message, and I think it's one that needs to be heard. I think it's important for our party. But really, there is a Republican war going on behind the scenes. It's playing out in primaries all over the country tonight, where big money is going in against MAGA candidates. They have a problem in the Republican Party in terms of how unified they are. I don't think we have near as far to go.
Well, Claire, let me just ask you to engage with something that's been happening here on set tonight. We've had some hot criticism of Nikki Haley staying in the race from my beloved friend Alex Wagner, who's sitting here with me, highlighting the fact that Haley's endgame is, if she thinks she's going to win, that's not going to happen. If she thinks she's doing any damage to Donald Trump, there's no evidence of that. and that she continues to talk smack about Joe Biden in a way that potentially suppresses enthusiasm for Biden, or possibly sort of serves as a sort of heat sink for Democrats who might otherwise put themselves in Biden's camp, but can put themselves sort of uselessly in Haley's camp as long as she's still in the race. What do you think about that?
So, listen, she's my beloved Alex Wagner, too. But let me just say, I don't think it really matters. I think it matters for Nikki Haley's future. What does she want to do? Does she want to make a bunch of money, like Stephanie was talking about, giving speeches and being on corporate boards? Does she see some way forward in this Republican Party? No way. She's done in this Republican Party. It's over. She makes Mike Pence look popular in this Republican Party. So I don't think Haley has a future in this Republican Party, and I don't think her talking trash about Biden necessarily hurts Biden. But I think she's going to look silly if she comes out and endorses Trump. She's going to look pretty phony. Not good for her political legacy if she comes out after saying the things she said and endorses him.
Jen, what do you think along those same lines?
I think it doesn't. I mean, I think she's helpful. You know, it's just, I think it's very helpful for voters, independents, Republicans, Democrats, to hear a Republican make criticisms of Donald Trump. And even though she also says bad things about Biden, I think it's worth it. I think that's a valuable thing. And if she endorses Trump in the end, she's just going to look as she's going to look like she has no integrity. I don't really think that's going to hurt Biden. What we need are effective arguments against Trump, and she's making those.
She's making those from somebody from the perspective, from a perspective that people think is a credible Republican perspective in lots of ways, and you can't manufacture that. That has to come from an authentic Republican place. Jen Palmieri and Claire McCaskill, our dear friends, great to have you with us tonight. Thank you. All right, we've got much more to come on this super, extra super, still continuing to be super, increasingly super Tuesday. We've still got another poll closing ahead. Stay with us. We just got a statement from the Nikki Haley campaign, a campaign spokesperson. The statement says this, quote, "We're honored to have received the support of millions of Americans across the country today, including in Vermont, where Nikki became the first Republican woman to win 2 presidential primary contests. Unity is not achieved by simply claiming we're united. Today, in state after state, there remains a large block of Republican primary voters who are expressing deep concerns about Donald Trump. That is not the unity our party needs for success. Addressing those voters' concerns will make the Republican Party and America better." Statement tonight from Nikki Haley's campaign. Steve Kornacki. Today, I quote, "In state after state, there remains a large block of Republican primary voters who are expressing deep concerns about Donald Trump." Is that thesis from the Nikki Haley campaign borne out in the voting data as you see it?
Well, it's how you interpret it, but I mean, I would look at it this way. We gave you a number a little while ago. We've been keeping a running tab of the cumulative, that is, across all primaries and caucuses, what's the cumulative vote share for Nikki Haley and for Donald Trump, remembering that her talking point along these lines for the last few weeks has been, she's been calling it the 40%. She's been using that term over and over at rallies, a reference to her New Hampshire and South Carolina showings. I just want to show you some of the numbers we're seeing in these contests tonight, because they're substantially below that. I think Texas is the most glaring example here. She's barely cracking 15% in Texas statewide tonight, and that is with 80% of the vote in. You go north to Oklahoma, Trump is over 80%. You take a look over at Arkansas. There's a rule in Arkansas. It's the participation trophy delegate, they call it. Hit 20%, you get 1 delegate. The rest go to the other candidate, but you can get 1. She's short of 20%, the participation trophy delegate in Arkansas. You go to Tennessee. Donald Trump's approaching 80% here. She did win Vermont tonight. Very small number of votes in Vermont. And in terms of delegates right now, she's you can see the total here. Trump is on pace to finish near 1,100 delegates. Right now, when you add all the votes together, she's getting 23% of the vote tonight. I would note that number's been coming down as we've been monitoring it. Texas, where you still have votes to come, is continuing to drag that number down. down. She's a little south of it in California as well. So that might be the ceiling for how well she ends up doing tonight, just in terms of the percentage. And again, 43% is what she's been campaigning on. And the other thing, I do not have any insight, obviously, into what she's thinking, what motivates her, and what decisions she may make here. But if there's a scenario where Nikki Haley does end up exiting this race in the coming days, one thing to keep in mind is, given the delegate trajectory for Donald Trump right here, again, he's likely to finish approaching 1,100 delegates. He is now on course. He's going to get enough delegates tonight where he's realistically on course to crack that 1,215 number needed to officially win the nomination in next week's contests on March 12th. So that is the question for Haley's campaign. Do you want to be in the race getting 15, 20, 22% of the vote as Donald Trump officially crosses that number? Is there some scenario where you want to issue a statement like that, give a speech like that, and basically, what did they say about the strategy for Vietnam? Declare victory and get out.
Steve Kornacki, thank you very, very much. Clarifying, as always. Much appreciated. Again, what Steve just said there is that with the delegate haul tonight and the way things are going, it looks like Trump is on track to clinch the nomination on the Republican side within the next week, by March 12th. With Trump coming close to running the table on the primary contest thus far, although D.C. and Vermont. Don't forget D.C. and Vermont. We are inching closer to a general election rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Now, in terms of fundraising, the Democrats currently have a financial advantage over the Republicans. Joe Biden started the year with $46 million on hand compared to Trump's $33 million. Here's some news, though. Perhaps that imbalance will not last for long. Check out this scoop from the New York Times tonight. You see the headline there. Donald Trump seeking cash infusion meets with Elon Musk. New York Times reporting that Donald Trump met with Elon Musk and also a few other wealthy Republican donors seeking a cash infusion to support his campaign. That was within the last few days. That was reportedly over the weekend. According to the Times, Trump is now hoping to have a one-on-one meeting just with Elon Musk, who reportedly has been saying that he believes it is, quote, essential to defeat Joe Biden in November, quoting the New York Times there. Elon Musk, of course, is one of the 2 richest people on Earth. He could single-handedly erase any financial advantage Democrats might have heading into the general election in November if he decided to, and if he wanted to play it that way. What would that mean for what happens to the world and the Republic?
And we're sure that money is not to pay Donald Trump's legal bills.
Guess what? It can. And when we all sit here and go, oh, my gosh, Donald Trump owes $83 million on E. Jean Carroll. He owes $400 million here. And we say he doesn't have that money. Guess what? Whether it's Elon Musk or all sorts of other supremely wealthy forces out there, they would be happy to pay the bills for someone who could be the next president.
Yeah,
Elon Musk
owns the president of the United States.
He hates the FTC. And how much would he like it if he then owned the president?
Yes, I mean, this is, let's go back to Citizens United and Mitch McConnell and John Roberts, who have crafted the universe in which we operate, who have brought us to a position where the richest billionaire out of it's like an 1890s Gilded Age cartoon in a newspaper, and the corrupt president desperately in need of cash have a meeting, and what is either the explicit or implied quid pro quo in that interaction? Musk has tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of government contracts with the Pentagon through SpaceX. He has unbelievable amounts of interest in regulatory affairs. He's currently suing to get rid of the National Labor Relations Act of the New Deal to destroy unions across the board and render them unconstitutional. That is a current lawsuit he has filed onto. Think about the sheer ROI, return on investment, of an investment, and it is so shocks the conscience that this would even be possible. And it's only possible, again, because of Mitch McConnell, because of the Roberts Court and the MAGA Court, that you could even be in a position where you have such an obviously corrupt setup.
Chris, Tesla is the only car manufacturer that is allowed to sell directly to consumer, because one of the biggest, strongest lobbies in this country is car dealership owners, right? Yeah. So the fact that he could back Donald Trump, the fact that he could pay his bills and then be able to push Donald Trump around, giddy up. That's an easy one for him.
And by the way, he controls Starlink, which is critical to the defense of Ukraine and to the U.S. defense establishment. This guy could be the J.P. Morgan of the the current era, he would literally own a desperate, fearful man. I sat and watched 7 minutes of Donald Trump speaking from what looked like his basement the other day. Donald Trump is afraid. He's afraid of going to prison. He's afraid of losing everything that he built in New York, well, that his dad built, and that he borrowed money from the Russians or whatever after he failed at business. But he could be saved right now. All he needs is a billionaire like Elon Musk who wants to own him.
And to be president.
And then he gets to be president, and he gets to dismiss all his cases. Boom. He's basically, that is his MBS.
He's running for his life.
He's running for his life.
It also, does assume that Trump is inevitably going to win once he has Elon's money behind him. And though I believe that money in politics is a colossal problem.
Oh, yeah, no.
There is, he is
but
someone
you'd rather
who's
be
reliant.
even than outgunned.
He is, yes, but he is reliant on government contracts.
Yeah.
And, if Joe Biden's reelected and Elon Musk has bankrolled Donald Trump,
that's a great
point.
Tesla wasn't invited to the last EV summit at the White House, and they won't be invited in 2025.
What you're supposed to do with that money is to fund ground campaigns, mail campaigns, et cetera. They're already saying they're not going to do mail. Most of that money, let's be clear, is going to go to cure Donald Trump's personal financial issues, not to the ground campaign.
Can I just say one more thing about this, because I actually find it very usefully clarifying, is it's so much of the way that Donald Trump talks, so much of the way that our politics talk about are these sort of cultural signifiers, these points of intense sort of ideological, rhetorical, demographic conflict in the country, the invaders coming over the border, the sort of Marxists that run the Democratic Party, they're trying to destroy the future. When in power, what Republican governments do is do policy that helps people like Elon Musk. They cut corporate taxes. It's the only domestic policy bill that they passed the last time around when they didn't build the wall. They had all three.
They did make it easier for people adjudicated to be mentally ill to buy firearms.
They also did
that.
But to me, it's just there's this whole, you're sort of watching Elon Musk self-radicalize and online every day. His brain gets mushier and mushier and mushier. And there's part of this radicalization is social media and his own ego. But again, when you look at what governments do, local governments, state governments, federal governments, when they are Republican and conservative governments with power, they deregulate, they go after unions, they cut taxes for rich people. And so there's something very clarifying about Elon Musk and Donald Trump together in the same room, because it cuts through a lot of the faux populism and culture war nonsense that masks fundamentally the material interests that are being pursued by this man.
But that is also why people often falsely say Republicans are good for the economy, because in terms of deregulation, in terms of big business, that set will say a Republican is a safer bet for me.
For us, yes.
For us. And that's where that narrative comes from. You've even heard people say, well, if it's good for my boss, maybe it'll trickle down to me. It won't, but that's where the mindset comes from.
And by the way, what makes it perfect, chef's kiss perfect, is that the Supreme Court sits atop it all, trying to ensure the longevity of Republican government, because that is how they get their wonderful vacays. And they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that Donald Trump comes in so that those two grifters on the court, if I might say, can retire and have 30-year-old versions of themselves to replicate the grift.
I should just say, though, that in terms of the whole logic around there being legal policing of this, you shouldn't, ideally, in a democracy, have a multi-billionaire be able to come in and say, here are multiple billions of dollars to cover all your legal fees, to cover all your campaigning fees, and to set you up in a way that you can't lose. We technically shouldn't have that. But how do we police it? We police it by shame, right? Because it's speech. Money is speech, and therefore it's transparency. And so if all we can do is force disclosure of the funding, that will take care of itself, because people will be repulsed by this.
But Rachel,
and of course
shamelessness is Donald Trump's superpower.
Yes.
Remember, back when we were saying this guy doesn't pay his taxes, and he said, you're right, I don't, because I'm smart. But not to Democrats. When Joe Biden was running, he said, I'm going to close so many loopholes so it won't just be shameful for Republicans to violate emoluments and so on and so forth. And they haven't. And if we end up with a Donald Trump again, it's no holds barred. MBS, come on over for a barbecue.
I'm just going to say that there is this idea when you study countries that used to be democracies that slid out of democracy and became authoritarian instead. one of the things that everybody who studies that in every country tells you is that the institutions cannot defend themselves.
That's right.
And we have set up our institutions so that their defense against authoritarian rule and anti-democratic tactics is shame.
Right.
And is transparency, and is people knowing the information and being able to react accordingly. That, if that is all we've got, then our institutions will not defend our democracy. If we let things play out along these lines, our democracy will fall and we will become a country that doesn't have elections anymore. And so we're in a situation right now where we can't count on the existing structures to just do this on autopilot. There's only one way out of this. You have to pick one. You have to pick Donald Trump or you have to pick Joe Biden.
Yes.
There isn't a magic other answer.
Nope.
There's no institution, there's no court, there's no criminal prosecution.
There's also no
there is no
truth right now,
institution.
because
There
people
is
don't hear it.
There's no magic in the media. There's people having to figure out which one of those candidates they want and what it means for the future of this country.
Yeah.
And then going out and doing the work to make sure that that candidate wins. It means not only voting, it means literally doing what you can to make one of those two candidates win. And if you're not working for one of them, you are by default working for the other.
And by the way, you know what?
It's all we've got.
What the Biden campaign folks said, they're sending out two words tonight: cementing reality. And what you just said is what they're saying. They're saying what tonight was about was cementing the reality that it's Biden or Trump. And what Joe Biden was able to do is to clear 80% in almost all of these races to cement that reality. They're hoping that emotionally they can cement that reality for their voters, because their voters are the ones who are most fantasy prone when it comes, more so than Republicans, but Republicans are more disconnected from each other. They are actually having a fight that's bigger than the fight inside the Democratic Party. You just have some Democrats who would love for for Joe Biden to change his Middle East policy.
Democrats hoping that Republicans are going to take care of this problem, this Donald Trump problem, on their own side.
Not going to happen.
It's not happening. Our coverage continues in just a moment. We're going to be joined by Colin Allred, who won the Democratic nomination for Senate in Texas, who will run against Republican incumbent Ted Cruz this fall. Lots still to come here on MSNBC. Stay with us.
Okay, here we go. It is midnight here in New York City, 9 p.m. out on the West Coast. I'm Jen Psaki, picking up MSNBC's special coverage of Super Tuesday. I've got some of my favorite people, as always. The midnight shift is the best shift, as I like to say, to talk politics here at the big table, to break down everything that happened tonight. We're going to learn more tonight, too, and we do have a lot to talk about, because results from 16 states and one territory, don't forget that one, just brought us one big step closer to a general election rematch between President Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And as of this moment on the Republican side, Trump has unsurprisingly won a bunch of states so far, bringing his total number of delegates over 900. Not enough to clinch the nomination, but it's making it nearly impossible, if not impossible, for Nikki Haley to do that. So if we just take a second to look at Trump by the numbers, just to catch everybody up here, that's 4 indictments, 91 criminal charges, 2 impeachments, and yes, 911 delegates as of tonight. And on the Democratic side, President Biden has swept every state so far, bringing him to an overall total of 1,400 delegates. He did lose the caucus in American Samoa, but I think he'll survive. To a JP. There's 2 JPs here. Neither frontrunner has hit the magic number that is needed to officially clinch the nomination, but they are both pretty darn close. Now, of course, a major outstanding question coming into tonight we still have, it's not about Trump or Biden, but about Nikki Haley and how much longer she plans to stick around in this race. For what it's worth, Haley is projected to win the state of Vermont. That's her second win after her victory in Washington, D.C. over the weekend. But in most of the other primaries tonight, she really didn't do anything to expand her share of the vote in any meaningful way. Just in the last half hour, the Haley campaign released a statement saying, "We're honored to have received the support of millions of Americans across the country today, including in Vermont." Today, in state after state, there remains a large block of Republican primary voters who are expressing deep concerns about Donald Trump. That is not the unity our party needs for success. But Haley is reportedly watching the results tonight behind closed doors with no planned speech to her supporters and no scheduled events in the upcoming days. That doesn't exactly paint the picture of a thriving campaign with momentum to me, just to lay it all out for you. But for now, she's technically still in it. We will, of course, bring you any changes on that front, anything we learn from our reporters out there as we have them. And even if Nikki Haley is not long for this race, her presence on the ballot tonight once again showed real cracks in the armor of Trump's general election campaign. We're going to dive into some pretty telling exit polls on that front over the next hour the next 2 hours as well. As for Donald Trump, he spoke tonight. He gave a very low-energy speech tonight, I think it's fair to say, lying about his record on the economy and on COVID, and going on a completely fact-free rant about immigration. You know, just basically normal Trump victory speech sort of stuff. But tonight, we're not just following the race for the White House. There's also a whole lot of action down the ballot, lots of interesting action, notably in California. Polls in the state's highly contested Senate race just closed last hour. NBC News projects that Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff and Republican former baseball player Steve Garvey will advance to the general election in November. And America's about to learn a whole lot about a guy named Mark Robinson after he won the Republican primary in North Carolina's race for governor. Robinson is a Holocaust denier. He has called Beyonce satanic, and he said the acceptance of homosexuality will lead to, quote, the end of civilization as we know it. So a good guy. I promise I could go on. There's lots more, and I will go on later in the show. Josh Stein, the state's attorney general, won the Democratic primary in North Carolina, so that sets the stage for North Carolina to be a big state come November. It sets the stage to be a showdown between someone who represents stability and someone who represents extremism, which probably sounds pretty familiar to you. There's clearly a lot happening from the top to the bottom of the ticket in races all across the country. And over the next 2 hours, we are going to unpack what we know tonight, what we may still learn tonight, and what this all means for tomorrow and, of course, November of 2024. The panel is going to join me in just a moment. They're all here, ready to have a lot to say. But let's get right to Steve Kornacki at the big board. And, Steve, let's start with the overall picture of the night, and then I want to ask you about the Senate race in California, because that's a biggie that we just learned about in the last hour.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, overall, and you can see these delegate numbers are changing even in the last couple minutes. Donald Trump getting an extra one there. So that's 636 delegates for Donald Trump tonight to 37 for Nikki Haley. There are still a lot to be allocated in Texas. Let me just show you what's happening in Texas. Donald Trump is leading by 62 points in Texas. Haley is barely cracking 15% of the vote. So Trump's going to get a bunch more delegates out of Texas. There are a number of other states here that he's already winning handily, but he's going to get more delegates from. What that means is he's on track right now to finish well over 1,000 delegates tonight, I think approaching potentially 1,100 delegates. And if you just look at these results and fast forward a week, when you've got Georgia, when you've got Mississippi, when you've got Washington, when you've got a caucus, a key word there because Trump's been doing very well in caucuses, a caucus in Hawaii, Trump right now is getting what he needs tonight to have a very, very real chance of crossing the 1,215 threshold to formally claim the nomination next week. And again, it's just by racking up massive, massive wins in some of the, I mean, look at Alabama tonight. He's going to get all 40 delegates, it looks like, from Alabama, a 70-point margin. I mean, we certainly all expected him to win Alabama, but a 70-point margin, I'm not sure we were expecting that. Tennessee, Haley still hasn't cracked 20% here, with only about 20% of the vote still to come in. You know, even in what were supposed to be potentially strong states for Nikki Haley, take a look at Virginia. She's losing by a nearly 2-to-1 margin there, only about 35% of the vote. Look what happened to her in North Carolina tonight. She's losing by more than 50 points, just about all the vote counted in North Carolina. So she does pick up a victory in Vermont. Vermont, a very small state, and frankly, a demographic outlier in the national Republican primary. And so what this all kind of sets the stage for is what decision will she make in the coming days, whether to stay in this race or not. One thing I think she has to consider is the talking point that she's been using on the campaign trail. She calls it the 40%. The idea that this is based on her showing in New Hampshire, based on her showing in South Carolina, that there's 40%, a sizable minority of the Republican electorate that just doesn't want Donald Trump. That's been what her rhetoric's been built around. You're not seeing a 40% in these results tonight. The last time we checked in with the cumulative results, just add up all the primaries, add up all the caucuses. What share of the vote is Nikki Haley getting? I showed you where she's under 20, barely over 15 in states. She's getting collectively 23%, and that number may come down a tick or two because there's still vote coming in Texas, and that's really dragging her number down. In California, she's running under that 23% total, so that number may come down. She may really be at half of 40% in these contests tonight, and again, getting absolutely swamped in a number of them where she's well under 20%. So it does raise the possibility here where there are voters in the Republican side who were initially casting ballots for Haley, who in these subsequent states have looked at this and said, all right, it's time to get on board with Donald Trump. Might that be happening here? These results certainly suggest it. Is there also a benefit that Haley was receiving in the early primaries from crossover voters, independents in New Hampshire, independents and Democrats in South Carolina, who were really enthused in those states to come into the Republican Party where the rules allowed it and to vote against Donald Trump? And are we not seeing it in those numbers tonight? Certainly when you look at a result in a state like Virginia, which on paper had even more potential for Haley than South Carolina did. And look how far short she falls there, even in a very, very friendly state demographically. Minnesota, on paper, looked like a friendly state for Nikki Haley. She doesn't even crack 30% of the vote there. And the most demographically friendly state for Haley here was Colorado. Half the electorate, white, college educated. That's the group she's done the best with. She gets a third of the vote in Colorado. So there really has been a pretty significant drop-off in the demographics that Haley was appealing to in those early states in what they're delivering for her in these subsequent states. Does she want to be in this race a week from now, based on these results, collecting 15, 20% of the vote as Donald Trump potentially crosses that 1,215 delegate threshold and officially becomes the nominee? Obviously, I have no insight, but I think that's the nature of the dilemma she's facing, because coming at it tonight, she can't be pointing anymore to a 40% of the Republican primary vote that's not going to Trump. That number comes way, way down tonight.
At a certain point, Steve, the data and the numbers, which you're an expert on, do tell the story and make a reality clear for Nikki Haley. We'll just see when. Okay, so before we let you go, talk to us about the California Senate race. I mean, Garvey didn't really campaign that much. He really kind of surged in the last by saying not that much. That's a very generous thing I'm saying here. He really surged, it seems, in the recent weeks. So how did this all happen? What does it tell us, if anything, about the general election? I mean, it seems Schiff's in a pretty good spot here.
Yeah, I mean, look, we know that California is a very, very blue state, but there are Republicans in California. And I think what happened in the last couple of weeks is the Republicans realized, well, there really is kind of one Republican candidate in this race, and it's Steve Garvey. And so the Republicans who turned out today did check off, it appears, Steve Garvey's name, and he kind of has the field to himself on that side of the aisle. Overall in California, the Republican vote isn't going to get you too far, but in a four-way, hotly contested open primary, if you can corral just the Republican vote, it's going to be more than enough to get you into the top two. So that's how Garvey, I think, gets this position. Certainly you can talk about the assist he may have received from Adam Schiff and his strategy of actually running ads that really exposed Steve Garvey to folks, exposed his name. But Schiff as well, I mean, I think the other story here is we suspected, just based on the polling, that Schiff had a real good chance of locking down one of those top two spots. The polling wasn't indicating quite this. Better than 2-to-1 margin here over Katie Porter. She's the next best Democrat in terms of vote share here. She's under 14. Schiff's almost at 37. And you go even further down to Barbara Lee, the congresswoman from the Bay Area. She's just at 7%, again, with more than 40% of the vote counted statewide. So more of that Democratic vote really did coalesce behind Schiff, seemingly in the final days of this campaign. And there's a much, much clearer divide between these top two and the rest of the field. But in terms of the general election, again, just an incredibly deep blue state. Nobody doesn't think that Joe Biden is going to carry California by a wide margin this November. And the Democratic Senate candidate, just by dint of that, because split ticket voting between Senate candidates and presidential candidates has almost completely disappeared in the Trump era. The only Senate candidate to win an election since Trump emerged in 2016 in a state that the other party won, Susan Collins in Maine in 2020. Otherwise, they've all gone to form. So certainly that's the expectation in California. And just add it together, 37% for Schiff, 15% there for Porter. That's 52% Democratic, 7% for Lee. You're almost at 60% Democratic vote just right there between those three candidates. So that 29% for Garvey, when you combine those Democratic votes, suddenly it falls behind pretty quickly.
Feels a little bit of a climb for Steve Garvey, even with baseball and some good hair. Thank you, Steve, so much as always. And joining me now is an all-star panel of experts, former chief spokesperson for Vice President Kamala Harris, now co-host of The Weekend on MSNBC, Simone Sanders Townsend, former communications director for President Barack Obama, Jennifer Palmieri, former communications director for Jeb Bush's 2016 campaign, and now host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, and former Democratic senator from Missouri, Claire McCaskill. So I just want to start here. I just read part of Haley's statement a little bit earlier, but a line I left out I saved for all of you is what I feel is I don't know if it's trolling, if it's smart. Donald Trump gave a speech tonight. It was low energy, as I just said. It was tired Donald Trump. Although this is going to be his biggest speech of the year, probably, so I'm not sure why he didn't have a Coke or something beforehand, but he said in there, unity will happen quickly. You know, unity will happen. He didn't have anything nice to say about Nikki Haley. In this statement from a spokesperson in there, she says, unity is not achieved by simply claiming we're united. It's like, okay, and Nikki Haley. I mean, she's still in it for now. But let me start with you, Claire McCaskill, because you're going to be up early for Morning Joe, so we don't have you for that long. Tell me about, let's just start with Haley and Trump here, because there were also some numbers in here that made it clear that Trump still hasn't quite united his party at all, to put it generously. Again, what was your takeaways from kind of the Republican side of the primary tonight?
Well, I get tired of the focus on uncommitted voters and Biden has a problem in his party. Because listen, I think it's fine that people want to express their opinion by saying uncommitted in this primary process. But if you look at the numbers, today, Donald Trump failed to get a 70-point margin except in one state, and that was Alabama. Joe Biden got more than a 70-point margin in every single state except two. 80% of the vote, 85% of the vote, 88% of the vote. Our party is pretty united. It really is. And, you know, another time, another day, we'll talk about third-party threats, which I think is a real thing. Mm-hmm. But they've got a war going on in their party, Jen.
Yes.
And Nikki Haley knows it. Now, Donald Trump owns the party. Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. But there are people that, in fact, I might know a guy sitting next to me that used to say he was a Republican, and he now realizes that he's not a Donald Trump Republican. Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of those folks out there that I think Joe Biden can get.
Rhymes with Kim, Tim Miller. Great to see you. I know this is your prime time. So tell us, Tim, I think one of the questions we've all been asking ourselves is, what does Nikki Haley want? What is her goal here?
Okay, well, that's a psychological question, and, you know, I'm not a therapist.
Well, give us a strategic answer. What's the conversation she's having with her closest, you know, advisors?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the question, like, what does she want to do with her life, I think, is really the question, right? Because she's not going to win this primary. I appreciate there's a war going on in the party, but it's a pretty lopsided one, you know, and she's gotten defeated handily tonight, and she didn't hit her numbers in most of the states. Vermont repping. Good on you, Vermont, besides that. So, and she's not coming back in 2028. And I'm 90% sure that Nikki Haley knows that. I'm 90% sure she knows that. But this is not her party, and it's not going to be her party next time. So what she does now is more about what she
Meaning
feels.
MAGA's not going away before 2028.
MAGA's not going away.
Seems like there's no signs of that.
MAGA's not going away. And even if it does kind of go away, they're not going to the person that challenged Trump that's from the old Bush party. They'd be looking for a fusion candidate. So she is, and she's not going to be his VP. So she's not making a political decision. She's trying to decide, do I want to be the leader of this kind of rump faction of a traditional, whatever you want to call it, compassionate conservative Republican Party? Do I want to do that? Do I want to take on Donald Trump? Do I want to run third party? You mentioned that. Do I those are her options.
Do I want to be on boards and not be in politics?
Do I want to be on boards, right? Do I want to just go back to Sullivan Island and be on Zoom and like hang out? Or do I, you know, want to have TV cameras in front of me? Like, so that's why this is a psychological, it's not a strategic question. The strategy's over. She got wiped out tonight. And so good on her. I hope she stays in and keeps taking the fight to Trump and doesn't endorse him and galvanizes the Wall Street Journal Republicans and says, you can still get, you can still have a good stock market and not have autocratic fascism, right? I hope that she's out there doing that. We would love for that to happen, but TBD.
I mean, a lot of the big money people are with her. It's whether they go to him. He needs money. He's kind of got a money problem, in part because of his legal problems. Okay, there's a lot of comms professionals happening happening over here. There's a lot of calm superpowers. So you've both advised presidential candidates, including presidential candidates who didn't necessarily win. We've all been there. We've all been there.
We've been there. I've been there really lost-handedly. So
well, come on, you got nothing on me on losing handily. You got nothing on me.
There's no President Kerry, President Sanders, or President Clinton. We're all here. It's okay. We're all here together. Or President Edwards. So this is a night. This is a night. This is a night, as Tim said, where it is psychological. It's hard to drop out of a presidential race. What do those conversations look like? And if you get to the point with Nikki Haley that it's time to drop out because the numbers are not there, I think we all know that. What are you advising her? Give a speech tomorrow? Wait a week? Wait 2 weeks? Keep fighting?
Paul Mary, I don't know about you, but for me it was very telling that it was a spokesperson that put out this statement and not Nikki Haley. It was very telling that they had no plans to be seen tonight, and she has nothing on her schedule for the foreseeable future. So for me, that says the conversations they were waiting to have the real conversations after Super Tuesday, and that the next couple of days, that is where the conversations will happen. And if she's smart and she decides she is going to drop out, she picks a Sunday show stage somewhere to do it where she will actually get eyeballs for all of the things that she's saying and at least control a narrative for one day or one morning.
There was one more sentence in that statement.
Oh, sorry, we didn't need to leave. I just love that one sentence.
Well, no, but okay, she says, this is not the unity our party needs for success. Addressing those voters' concerns will make the Republican Party in America better. So I was like, is that a ransom? What is she asking for? Addressing those voters' concerns will make, so I wonder if they're thinking that is she thinking, okay, I am going to say the party needs to do something or ask for something, but that seems to suggest the beginning of an exit strategy.
It seems like it.
Like she's but it is, but just like on the personal point, like it's hard to end a presidential campaign because the private jet goes away and all of the staff go away and there's not TV cameras following you around, and then all of a sudden you have to figure out the bills that have piled up and the laundry you need to do and the kids go to school, and it's just like it all goes away, and that is a very hard thing to walk away from, particularly when you have she's got the future that Tim laid out, which is really not much of a future, certainly not one that you can map out in a conventional way.
Can I say one point about Nikki Haley? Look, you can only demand things if you have leverage, and I hear what I thought it was a good comm strategy to come out with the 40%. They themselves probably knew that it was a shot in the dark whether they would hit 40% tonight, but you know what? You live on your talking points till you got to change them, and that's all she's got is talking points and conviction.
There's a percentage that didn't support Trump, that won't support Trump.
So it holds in some regard, but where are your delegates? What is your actual leverage? The leverage right now that she's talking about is theoretical. It's wrapped up in these percentages that you got to get Steve Kornacki to come out with the big board on to point out to people. You need something tangible to point to have your leverage to go in and try to demand things. So if that is in fact a ransom note, it's loose.
If it's a ransom, you need to negotiate. I don't know. I'm mixing analogies. Okay, Claire, we are not waving magic wands on what Nikki Haley could do here, but I heard you make a point earlier about how she basically has said she doesn't want Trump to be president. In no other words, sometimes she says maybe she's open to it. I don't know. She says a lot of things. If you were to wave a magic wand, what could Nikki Haley do? Is it endorse Joe Biden, or is it something short of that? I mean, what could she do that would be useful in this race?
That would be useful.
She's probably not going to do that, short of that.
I don't think she's going to do that. I mean, it all depends on whether Nikki Haley is worried about her legacy politically, because she has no political future. Her political life is over unless she decides to change parties and runs, in a state where a Democrat can get elected to something. I don't think she has a future in the Republican Party. So, does she want to make money? Well, I'll tell you what, if she endorses Trump, then really I don't think she has much credibility left. Because then what really does she stand for? Nothing. Absolutely frickin' nothing.
We got to take a break.
Her
but we will
endorsement
come
is
back.
important, though. It's an important
Hold
talking
this thought.
point.
We will come right back to it. Claire McCaskill, you have to be up early. Thank you for joining
You
us
bet.
and sticking
Thank
around.
you.
Really appreciate it. Everyone else is sticking around. Congressman Colin Allred is standing by. He won a big Senate primary in the great state of Texas tonight and has earned the right to take on Senator Ted Cruz in November. Fun. We're coming back after a quick break. Okay, I want to turn to Texas, where Democrats have chosen their candidate to face Republican Senator Ted Cruz, that guy, in November. NBC News projects that Congressman Colin Allred will win the Senate Democratic Texas primary. Here's the congressman earlier addressing his supporters. Joining us now is Texas Congressman Colin Allred, who won the Democratic primary tonight for the U.S. Senate. Congratulations. First of all, he will now be running to unseat incumbent Republican Senator Ted Cruz in November. Well, first of all, you have a big road ahead of you, so I hope you are sleeping and have coffee and all of the things. But let me just start with this. I mean, no Democrat has won a statewide office in Texas in 30 years, as you're very familiar. That's the longest streak of its kind in the United States. So tell us, what's your campaign strategy to break that streak?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Jen. It's a great night for folks who have helped us get to this point. I want to thank so many folks out there. But listen, this election is going to be about our future and about where we're going to go from here and who's going to be serving us in the Senate for the next 6 years. We are a diverse, dynamic, rapidly growing state. We need a senator who can bring fresh ideas and new leadership. And we've seen enough of Ted Cruz here in Texas. We know who he is. We know he's only looking out for himself. We know that he won't put the interests of 30 million Texans first. He'll always be putting his own interests first. And as you know, I've been one of the most bipartisan members of the entire House of Representatives. I'm literally the most bipartisan member of the Texas delegation. We've been running against the most extreme senator in the country to restore our rights and our freedoms and to make sure that who we are as Texans is represented in the Senate.
So for the people, Congressman, who are just tuning in, they're getting to know you, tell us, what is the thing about Ted Cruz that makes you want to unseat him? I know he spends a lot of time podcasting, probably more than being in the Senate, but what else? What should people know about why he's the person that should be kicked out and sent back to Texas?
Well, as I said in my speech tonight, when I played in the NFL, we talked about guys who were me guys, who were always looking out for themselves first, who didn't put the team first and really were only interested in getting themselves in the press or whatever the case may be.
I think we're having a little technical difficulty there. Hopefully we'll get the congressman back to talk to him more. Well, hopefully, if we don't get him back, thank you so much, Congressman Allred. If you can see us and hear us, we appreciate you. And if we get you back, we'll talk more. I do think we have Matthew Dowd, who's going to be joining the conversation. He's the former chief strategist for George W. Bush's 2004 campaign. He knows a few things about Texas and lots of things about politics, I think it's fair to say. So I mean, Texas has been, I don't know if it's the white whale, the blue whale. Democrats have been wanting Texas for so long. Break down for us the reality of this Senate race, what's possible, how likely is it? Give us your thoughts.
Good to talk to you, Jen. As you probably know, I was the campaign manager for the last Democrat to win in Texas statewide 30 years ago. So it was been a long time, and I remember that race well as Texas was changing. I think Texas has went from a Democratic state to a swing state, very short period of time, to a red state, to a light red state, and it's on the verge of becoming purple. The question is, can it become purple in a presidential election year, or does it need to be in a midterm year in the course of this? I think Colin Allred has a real shot at the race, but it's still a light red state as of right now in a presidential year. So I think his chances, I think, to a large degree, depend on the margin of victory. Depends on what the margin is between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And if that margin is in single digits or 7 or 8, then I think he's got a real good shot at beating Ted Cruz. If it's double digits, then I think it becomes much harder.
I think we might have Colin Allred back. Matthew Dowd, don't go anywhere. Let's see if we have him back. All right, Congressman, how are you? Thank you so much. I'm glad the technical difficulties allowed us to return to talk to you more. So I was just asking you about what people should know about Ted Cruz, and you were talking about when you were in the NFL, people talked about me guys. So tell us a little bit more. What should people know out there about Ted Cruz who are just tuning into this race?
Yeah, well, to me, serving public office should be about the folks you're trying to serve, not about yourself. And to me, Ted Cruz is the ultimate me guy. He's somebody who's always just been looking out for himself. That's why he podcasts 3 times a week. That's why when we have critical legislation that will help our state, he votes against it. He's somebody who consistently has pitted us against each other because it pushes him forward. And this is something that I think most Texans are tired of. And so I hear y'all talking about where we've been and what the margins of victory need to be and things like that. But listen, let me tell you, folks in Texas are tired of being embarrassed by their senator, and they know that we can get a new one. And that's what this campaign is going to be all about.
Congressman Colin Allred, always a pleasure talking with you. I know you've got a lot of work ahead. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're going to bring back in Matthew Dowd, our Texas expert, one of them, joining us here to talk a little bit more about this race. So let me ask you, Matthew, I mean, you've been involved in so many aspects of politics and government. Obviously, the president has a big speech on Thursday, the State of the Union speech. It's his biggest speech of the year, maybe aside from his convention speech, but may even have a larger audience. What do the people of Texas need to hear from him? What might help Colin Allred that the president could talk about on Thursday night?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I think it's not only the people of Texas, but the people in Arizona and the people in Michigan and people in Pennsylvania need to hear. I actually think it's the most important speech he's going to give, even more important than the convention, because as you know full well and everybody on the panel knows, people look at conventions and they get a big audience, but they look at through a prism of a more partisan audience. When you do give a State of the Union, a State of the Union is much less partisan and much more, I'm the President of the United States. I actually think in many ways after tonight, I have to tell you tonight, watching tonight's election results, I have to say, was a little bit like watching a football game that you had put on tape delay when you already knew what the results were, and then you watched the football game. That's what it felt like. Since we've known for a while that this was going to be Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, now I think it's become formalized. That speech on Thursday is really the first big step in the process of what this election is about. And now I know it's a State of the Union, so it's not going to be fully political, but I think he actually has to take the speech and basically say this is a choice that's confronting America in a broad, big way, and not only philosophical, but what it means in this country today and what our point in history is, because I think this is probably the most important point in our history since the advent of the Civil War. I actually think we're at that point, the most important point in our country's history in the last 160 years. And I think he has to make that argument. And I think if he makes that argument and then does it for the next 250 days, then I think the speech has resonance. If he leaves the speech and only isolates the speech and then does something different the day after that speech, then I don't think it has much effect.
It's a really important point. It's kind of what happens after that, and that's just coming up in 2 days from now. Let me ask you about immigration, because it is an issue that Democrats, the president, are underwater on, meaning they're far behind on. In Donald Trump's speech tonight, he spent a good chunk of the speech, I mean, it was a bit of a fact-free rant, but talking about immigration. He killed the bipartisan immigration bill. Is that an issue that Joe Biden and the Democrats should spend a lot of time trying to make up ground on? Or what do you think strategically, how should they approach that issue?
Well, you know, here in Texas, it's obviously a big issue, but I think you look at Ask Voters in North Carolina and Ask Voters in Wisconsin, and they list it as one of the top 3 issues in the country today. The economy, democracy, and immigration seem to be the 3 top issues today. I don't think they can seek to spend a huge amount of resources on it, in my opinion, but they have to be proactive on it and make the country understand that if you want this solved, the people in the way of solving this problem are the Republicans, and the Republicans in Congress and Donald Trump. They don't want to solve the problem. They just want to have the problem exist. But they do it. They need to do it in such a way. We're never going to win as Democrats. Democrats are never going to win on this issue. It's just you have to cut the margin to a degree. But I think the worst thing you can do, and that some Democrats have fallen into this trap, that of being defensive on the issue. They need to be proactive and put the Republicans on the defense. And if you just cut the margin a little, then I think that's a positive effect in the campaign.
We saw a little bit of that in that special election in New York with Tom Suozzi's race. So it'll be interesting. Every part in the country is not New York, but it was an interesting strategy. Matthew Dowd, thank you so much. As always, thanks for rolling with us with some technical issues there. And coming up, we'll check in with the Biden campaign. A spokesperson for the Biden-Harris campaign, Kevin Munoz, is standing by, and he joins the conversation next. We'll be right back. President Biden released a statement late tonight on the results of tonight's primaries across the country. Here's what he said. Today, millions of voters across the country made their voices heard, showing that they are ready to fight back against Donald Trump's extreme plan to take us backwards. 4 years ago, I ran because of the existential threat Donald Trump posed to the America we all believe in. He's driven by grievance and grift, focused on his own revenge and retribution, not the American people. He's determined to destroy our democracy, and he'll do or say anything to put himself in power. There's a lot of alliteration in that statement. I like it. Joining us now is spokesperson for the Biden-Harris campaign, Kevin Munoz. Hi, Kevin. Thanks for staying up late with us.
Hi, Jen. It's past my bedtime, but I'm good to be with you.
It's all good. You just have a campaign to win tomorrow. So let me start with this. I know you guys were watching all the primaries tonight, but probably especially the places where you're actually going to compete and spend money and resources leading up to November. And I'm talking about, well, there's a couple states, but North Carolina specifically. I mean, that was the state the president came closest in 2020 to winning, but didn't win. Tell us what you saw there in North Carolina. Is there anything that was encouraging to your team as you looked at the data and the results?
Well, look, what we saw in North Carolina was a part of a trend that we saw across the country and what we've seen throughout these Republican primaries, which is that a lot of the independent, the suburban, the moderate Republican voters that are decisive to getting to 270 electoral votes are just not with Donald Trump. And not only does Donald Trump not have their support, we saw between 7 and 8 and 10 of these Haley voters say that they're not committed to voting for Donald Trump this November. So we see these as opportunities. We see Donald Trump as having no interest in actually reaching across the aisle, reaching these voters, and as opportunities for us to continue to expand this coalition. Look, North Carolina is a state that has seen the impact really intimately of this MAGA extremism. They had these extreme Republicans override Governor Cooper's abortion ban veto. And so we think that's going to be an issue that's going to be highly mobilizing this cycle.
No, it's definitely going to be a huge state to watch, a very young, energetic state party chair as well. Okay, I also know from doing a few campaigns, we all have, we've probably done a combined 150 campaigns, this panel, but that you were probably watching Donald Trump's speech tonight. There was a lot in it. Most of it was pretty detached from reality. It was low energy. I'm just going to keep repeating that. But what was going on in the campaign text thread about that one? What were you guys saying to each other as you were watching that speech? What did you note about it?
Oh, look, it's interesting. I think a lot of times when he does these low energy speeches, some people will say in the media that this is actually him being more disciplined. This is him talking to a broader audience. It's not. He is low energy. He, this morning, was talking about how immigrants are poisoning the blood of this country. That is Nazi rhetoric. And so we have to keep our eyes laser focused on the real negative impact that Donald Trump has and how toxic his agenda is for the voters that will decide this election. And no, Mar-a-Lago's speech alongside all of his kind of crazy friends changes the facts here, that he has an agenda that is just deeply toxic. And we have to keep talking to the voters about that honest answer.
Kevin Munoz, I'm going to let you go get some sleep so you can go fight another day tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we have much more to get to tonight. The panel is coming back after a quick break, so stay with us. Well, Donald Trump is racking up several expected victories tonight. We're also getting some insights into the voters who chose not to support him, thanks to NBC's exit polls. Among GOP primary voters who backed Haley in the states of Virginia and North Carolina, a majority of them said that they would not commit to voting for the Republican nominee, regardless of who it is this November. And a plurality of her voters in California said the same. In other words, Haley's backers have pretty deep reservations about Trump in those states. And to that point, a lot of Haley's support comes from voters trying to stick it to Trump. Among Republican primary voters backing her in Virginia, North Carolina, and California, a sizable number said their vote was mainly against her opponent rather than for her. Simone, Jen, and Tim are back with me. So let's talk about this, because there are some, and we were just talking during the break about some opportunities for the Biden team. But let's start with that exit poll number, because it is kind of, it stuck out to me when I looked at those numbers. What did you think?
Yeah, that was the one thing it wasn't just printed. I even wrote it down in my own handwriting that they will not commit to supporting Republicans. And there's this whole thing in the the Times poll that was over the weekend that everybody freaked out about, if you're worried about Biden, and it said that Trump was getting 93% of his vote, right? And for Biden, only 83% of his 2020 voters said that they were going to vote for him. But then we see in these actual, when people are actually voting, Trump is not getting 20 to 40% of the vote in the Republican primary.
Yeah.
And then you have Republicans saying, or people voting in the Republican primary anyway, saying that they will not necessarily back the nominee. That tells me there are a lot of independents in there that are open to voting for Biden. In addition to Biden, I mean, it's not great that Biden's not getting about 20% of Biden's vote from 2020 is not yet with him, but that means he has room to grow and to get those people back. I think that's not super easy, but easy-ish. And some universe of independents that, some small percentage could vote for him, and there's your victory.
It's true. I mean, he needs to get those voters back. The other point someone made to me today, which stuck with me, is that the 2020 electorate is not the 2024 electorate, in part because of Dobbs. And what we know from 2022 is that there's a swath of voters who turned out who are mad as hell about abortion rights and their access to abortion rights. And they turned out in 2022. They've turned out in special elections. They turned out in Virginia, where I live. So, Simone, what was your takeaway from that exit poll, or maybe other things that might be good signs for the Biden team?
Well, look, we have our great sheet of exit polls right here. I think the economy numbers stuck out to me. I looked at, in North Carolina, in the primary, of the Republican voters, 51% favored a national law banning abortions. But if you go down and you look at Super Tuesday Republican primaries that oppose a federal law banning abortions nationwide, in California, 54% opposed. In North Carolina, 49% opposed. Virginia, 54% opposed. Those are Republican primary voters opposing a national law in those states. That North Carolina number, that 51, it concerns me, and that also, I think, speaks to how the current lieutenant governor is the now Republican nominee for governor there. So abortion is a general election issue in 2024, and I do think the Biden campaign realizes it. I also think that the Trump campaign realizes it, which is why we are trying to, they're trying to take a magic wand and poof and make us forget that Donald Trump is the person that appointed the judges that overturned Roe, and then he bragged about it, like he doesn't have a
that didn't happen.
It didn't happen. He's like, whew, that wasn't me. And we cannot forget. We know what it is. The vice president has been on this tour of talking about Roe and reproductive freedoms. And after the State of the Union, her team has said that she's going to Phoenix on Friday, again for her 5th stop on that tour to talk about this issue. Phoenix, Arizona, a state that the Biden camp won in 2020. They needed to win that in order to be the president. They need to win it again to win re-election. So this is a strategy that I don't think is necessarily showing up in the polling. And every place abortion was on the ballot, it didn't. No, it was supposed to be the red wave in 22, and it was like a trickle. A little spigot.
Well, this is the abortion issue. I mean, it's interesting for a range of reasons, including it's all of our rights, not yours, sort of, but all of ours.
Tim's with us.
It may be strange that I'm going to turn to a man to talk about abortion rights, but that's what I'm going to do.
All right.
Because one of the interesting
we need men in this conversation.
Well, we need men in the conversation. One of the interesting things about abortion rights is you do see in some of these polls, it's not the #1 issue for people. It does engage and excite a population of people, but it needs to be in front of people's faces as a threat in order for it to be a voting issue. So you're also a communications expert. How do they do that, including with independents, moderate Republicans who may not love Trump? may care about this issue.
All right, are you ready for a man's view on abortion? I'm about to center the male voter response to abortion, because I think that Democrats and strategists need to talk to those guys too.
Yes.
And I think that this is where a lot of growth is. And I say this just because we saw in the midterms, a lot of women were upset with Republicans, a lot of moderate suburban Republican types. They're already voting Democrat, right? They probably voted for Biden in 2020. So how could you potentially grow post-Roe? And Trump has done so well with non-college men that are not Christian. Like, we talk all the time about evangelicals, but Trump brought in all those, the famous Obama-Trump union guys, right? Like that crowd, the Joe Rogan crowd. I think if I was the Democrats, I'd be really focused on talking to them about abortion rights, because some of them also, that could be a very important issue in their lives as well. They're going to be, they're pro-choice. They're not looking for, they were for Trump because he wasn't creepy, weird Christian like Ted Cruz and Mike Johnson, right? Like, they liked Trump because he seemed secular.
Right.
And so Democrats need to message to them, in addition to women, about the threats here are very real. And if Trump gets in there, it's not going to be apprentice bro-y Trump that is handling the abortion issue. It's going to be Mike Johnson. And it's going to be that Supreme Court. And I think that could be a way for Democrats to gain with a group that they haven't done that well.
No question. I mean, go ahead.
I just think that the IVF decision in the Alabama Supreme Court is the most important thing that has happened in the presidential race thus far. I mean, it is just, and it kind of feels like 22, where abortion was at a sort of low simmer in terms of polls. But then when you talk to people, Tamara Keith was down from NPR, was down in North Carolina talking to voters that were early voting, and she said that every Democrat she talked to, that's why they were. For every person who said, I'm voting in the Democratic primary, we don't know, maybe they weren't, right? But that was the issue, and the vice president says it so well. They want to tell you that you can't end a pregnancy, and you can't, nor can you start a family. Like, you need someone's permission to do that.
And Kristen is coming. We're going to talk a lot more about abortion rights, I suspect, in the coming days. Simone Sanders Townsend, thank you. Jennifer Palmieri, thank you. We'll let you, both of you, get to bed. Thank you for staying up with us. Tim Miller is having some coffee, and Red Bill, you're sticking with us and sticking around. We have another full hour of our special coverage coming up. Lots more friends are standing by, and we're coming back after a very quick break. Welcome back to MSNBC's special coverage of Super Tuesday. It's 1 a.m. here on the East Coast, 10 p.m. out west, and the biggest primary day of this election year. Millions of Americans took to the polls today across 16 states and 1 territory. At this hour, former President Donald Trump has won 12 states, bringing his total number of delegates above 900. That puts him just a few hundred away from the magic number he needs to clinch the Republican nomination. And on the Democratic side, President Joe Biden cleaned up in all of the contests tonight, except in American Samoa, but I have a feeling he'll be just fine. He now has just over 1,400 delegates. So there were no major surprises tonight at the top of the ticket, except maybe the one win by Trump's only remaining competitor, Nikki Haley, in the state of Vermont. NBC News is reporting that Haley spent time at her campaign headquarters tonight, watching results with staff and allies. She gave no public remarks, no speech to her supporters, and as of yet, she has no scheduled events on the calendar. That is not a sign of momentum in a campaign I will lay out for you. So at the end of the day, the country clearly remains on track for a rematch of 2020. The delegate numbers tonight tell you that. But of course, with one major difference. Donald Trump is now facing 91 charges across 4 criminal cases, many of which are related to his attempt to steal the last election. And while the big lie might still play well with his MAGA base, tonight's primaries once again exposed some warning signs for Trump in a general election. Warning signs that Haley's campaign called out in a statement released just moments ago, writing, quote, "We're honored to have received the support of millions of Americans across the country today, including in Vermont. Today, in state after state, there remains a large block of Republican primary voters who are expressing deep concerns about Donald Trump. That is not the unity our party needs for success. Addressing those voters' concerns will make the Republican Party and America better." Now, clearly, a large block of Republican primary voters are clearly expressing deep concerns about Donald Trump. The big question heading into November for Joe Biden and for democracy is just how big is that block? Joining our conversation, fresh meat, special correspondent for Vanity Fair, Molly Jong-Fast, former communications director for Senator Ted Kennedy, and MSNBC analyst and North Carolina native. We will get to that. Anthony Coley, former communications director for Jeb Bush's 2016 campaign, now host of the Bulwark podcast. Tim Miller had some coffee. He's still with us. And former Republican congressman from Florida, David Jolly. Also with us, former senior aide to the Biden-Harris campaign, Adrian Elrod. So it is a full crew. Okay, I'm going to start with our fresh meat, as I like to say. David Jolly, you were just talking about the Haley campaign and what's going on there. What is going on there? And what do all these signs tell you about what they may be talking about?
As a Republican candidate, Nikki Haley should drop out of the race tomorrow. But she should have dropped out after New Hampshire. She should have dropped out after South Carolina. But clearly she's largely been statistically eliminated. It might take next Tuesday or the following Tuesday in Florida, Ohio, Illinois, and so forth. As a Republican candidate, she's done. She never actually was competitive against Donald Trump, if you look at the delegate count. But as a surrogate for a coalition of delivering voters in a general election to Joe Biden, then she should stay in the race for another 2 weeks, because that is essentially her contribution to the body politic now, which is to coalesce a coalition of people that say we have grave reservations about Donald Trump. And here's what Nikki Haley is missing. If you are essentially coalescing this coalition saying Donald Trump is unfit, well, losing to Donald Trump doesn't make him more fit for office. So how does Nikki Haley turn around and all of a sudden say, I called him unstable, unhinged, I said he was a sympathizer with Putin, I question his competence and his age, but now I'm going to support him? She probably will, because she does that. She
seemed to leave the door open to this on Meet the Press this weekend, but...
Look, listen, so her voters will answer that question individually, and I think a lot of her voters will go to Biden. But the moment for Nikki Haley, for Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, and others, is not to simply say, I'm not voting for Donald Trump. It's to say, I'm voting for Joe Biden. That's how you deliver the country forward. I doubt Nikki Haley would ever do that.
All right, Molly, you happen to know, we're not going to focus on this, but I just have to note it. You have to personally know the man who won he's a JP, so I like him, American Samoa, so that's an interesting detail about you.
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about Nikki Haley. We've been talking about exit polls. We've been talking about what's good for Joe Biden and not. What was your big takeaway from tonight?
So, two things, and Jen Palmieri was talking about this, and we were talking about this at the break. These polls are wrong. We know these polls are wrong from the exit polls.
Which piece of it is most wrong to you?
What it is that there is a real never Trump contingent. And remember, Trump is a primary candidate. He has only ever tried to appeal to Republican primary voters. And he cannot marshal that group together the way he needs to. And remember, part of his trick in 2016 was he got these low-frequency voters out, these people who almost never voted, which is why the polling was so off. And you're just not seeing that same kind of enthusiasm. So, and the other thing I would say is, like, there still is never Trump. Never Trump continues. There is no never Biden. Right? Like, that's not a thing.
The uncommitted vote, I think, is what you're referring to, which is sending an important message about a policy change people want. Let me ask you, Anthony. You can tell me anything you want about your takeaways, but one of the challenges, what we were talking about with Palmieri, is the 83% or 85%, depending on the poll you look at. That percentage is the percentage of President Biden's voters from 2020 who are still with him. My view on this is that that's not the same electorate as 2024, because the 2022 electorate turned out a lot of abortion rights voters. They're betting on, they have to turn them out. What do you do if you're the Biden campaign? You're a communications expert, among many other things, to try to appeal to that percentage of voters who are with Trump, or maybe they're just like, they don't want to turn out?
That's right. So their biggest challenge is really one of complacency and amnesia. And David and I were talking about this earlier. The further you get away from a bad thing, the more often you forget about how bad it really was. And so the big question, if you are Joe Biden's campaign tonight, is the same question that every incumbent president has, right? How do you rally people around your vision for the party again? And when I first met you, it was on the Kerry campaign, 2004. We were like 4 years old. But it was the same challenge that Bush had, is the same challenge that Obama had, right? And the way they won those elections is that they framed it not as a referendum on their presidencies, but as a contrast between two very distinct, very clear competing visions and ideologies. And that's what Joe Biden has got to do.
Yeah.
That's a very good. Now, Tim, I mean, one of the challenges of running, there's a lot of advantages of running as an incumbent.
Yeah.
One of the challenges is that people see you every single day, and anything they don't like in their lives, they blame on you. I mean, that's, I guess, you know, the buck stops with you.
Yeah.
What do you do if you're the president about some of the issues that are on the minds of voters that he's held responsible for? Maybe inflation, immigration. There's a couple of them that pop in the polls.
And I think that this is what is showing in some of the polls, actually. A lot of people are really just now coming to terms with the fact that this is going to be Biden and Trump, and they're upset about something. They're either upset about immigration or inflation or something else in their life or his age, and they're, you know, saying to pollsters, no, I'm a no on Biden. I do think that they reconsider that as the head-to-head and as the, you know, real choice comes into focus. I'll say this, though. If I'm the Biden campaign, I don't know. I was a little spooked by the New Yorker article. I'm happy that Molly thinks that the polls are wrong, but if I'm the Biden team, I would like them to be worried. I would like them to be a little worried. I'm sorry, Molly. They're losing by 5 to a guy that tried to overturn the election. So I'd like them to just do a little bit of what they're doing already.
A little worry is good. You can't have complacency.
Yeah, a little worried. Go out there and...
They are worried. I mean, I don't think they're worried, but they are on it. Like, I was there interviewing someone in the White House this week, and, like, they are very, this is a campaign that is very with it. They are very reactive. They are out there. I mean, and I think the White House, I don't think they're complacent. I mean,
the pivot is happening.
Yeah,
that's important. The pivot is happening.
We're going to see it on Thursday.
Right. And the contrast that they're going to have to put forward to detail the very competing visions in the country and the very real threat that Donald Trump poses to American democracy.
And this contrast, they got to do it on things like immigration, and I think he is starting to do it. But you got to do it in the State of the Union. Look, he wanted to solve the problem. He made offers to Congress, and it's the Republicans that don't want to solve the problem. It's trying to solve things versus crazy. That's a good contrast for him, but he's got to be out there doing it.
Here's been my question here. We've all communicated a lot, including, of course, as a member of Congress, you communicate a lot. As a journalist, you communicate a lot. It is hard to communicate. They screwed this up and killed the deal. I mean, that is a hard thing to communicate.
Yeah.
So what do you think? I mean, independent voters, people are concerned about this issue.
On the border and the economy, I do think the Biden administration needs to get control of these issues, or it could really hurt them in November. But I think there's reason to.
Well, get control, just to be clear, I think means make up some ground. Not win it.
Make up own the message, don't accept the Republican narrative. Republicans always run on gloom and doom and negative partisanship. The truth is, and I'm going to do the riff I did at 4 o'clock for Joe Biden, I promise you, it is morning in America again. Tomorrow, more people will go to work than ever before. Home ownership remains at historic highs. The stock market's at an all-time high, and so is your retirement account. Access to health care and education has never been easier for the American family. Inflation's coming down, and real wages are going up. And on the issue that people seem most concerned about at the border, it was Joe Biden who led a bipartisan coalition, and it was Republicans that stopped it. So, Thursday night at the State of the Union, frame that for Republicans, and listen. And then what do you do to Republicans? You say, stop standing in the way of growing the economy and solving the border issue. Why don't you work for America instead of against us? Look, the facts are there for the administration, and they're doing very well on this message. It comes down to framing the message in the way that you want the American voter to show up in November and think about, because right now, Republicans do have a little bit of control of the economic and the border message.
But it's also more than that. The last thing I said before you go to the next thing is that the energy and the performance has got to be
You're talking about the State of the
unapologetic. I mean, that's unapologetic about where things stand in the economy.
But you hear him trying to get that message out there, and I do think I agree, and they should be, they should be worried, and I do think they are. I mean, I think they know the gravity of this. I mean, look, this is the do you want to have elections anymore election.
The last thing I will say here is that Democrats, God bless them, I love my party, we have become a party.
It's a big umbrella.
It's a big, yes. And this is the point that you were making earlier. The votes that we are seeing in primary after primary, even going back to the 2018 midterm elections, the voters are not matching what these people are telling these these pollsters. And I will tell you, I will always take people casting ballots over what they tell pollsters any day of the week.
There's a lot of time. Okay, we've got a lot of thoughts. I know we're going to get Congressman Jacob Auchincloss coming up soon so that we can talk to him about what he thinks about everything. We're probably going to have to take a break very soon as well. So let's go to, I think, Okay, so let's keep talking then.
Adrian.
Oh, Elrod, Adrian Elrod. I'm sorry, Adrian Elrod. I am very sorry to forget that you were there. And you know, you and I have worked a lot together over 20 years. Okay, Adrian Elrod, tell us what your big takeaway from tonight was. What makes you elated? What makes you concerned as you look at the results from tonight?
Well, I think one of the biggest concerns has been something, or not really a concern of mine, frankly, but I think one of the concerns that it should be for Donald Trump is something that we've been talking about, Jen, since the Iowa caucuses, which is his coalition is not strong. It is not, you know, as firm as I think it's somebody who's effectively running as an incumbent should be. Nikki Haley, I think the latest numbers I saw, she got about 43% of the vote in Massachusetts. Of course, she won Vermont. Trump got about 60% in Iowa. You know, we can look at all these states and see that Nikki Haley, the anti-Trump Republican vote, or whatever you want to call it, is alive and well. So again, how is Trump going to try to coalesce this? As we know, Jen, and we have seen since 2016, when Donald Trump, you know, did, if you want to call it that, did win the election, did become the president. Every single election since then, he has not done well. Whether you're looking at, you know, 2017, 2018, obviously 2020. President Biden beat him. So his coalition is not firm. He is doing a lot to attract the red meat of his base, but he's not doing a lot to really expand that coalition and build a broader coalition to win the general. So I think, you know, yes, I mean, obviously there's the protest vote, or the uncommitted vote against Biden in some states, and the Biden campaign knows very well. I agree with what Molly and Anthony said, which they're firmly aware that there is work to do, of course, and they're taking this very seriously. But there are certainly fissures in the Republican Party, especially when it comes to who they're going to support. And there's going to be, I think, a lot of voters up for grabs going into the general election, especially some of these Haley voters that certainly the Biden campaign is going to try to go after.
I thought of you today, Adrian, because it's so early, and Hillary Clinton was ahead by 10, 11, 12 points at this point in time. Yeah. And unfortunately, there was not a President Clinton, just like there wasn't a President Kerry. It's a very early, important thing to remember. Okay, everybody stay where you are. Everyone sit tight. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts. Congressman, first of all, thank you so much for staying up late. I know you were young, but it is still late. I really appreciate it. Let me start with this. I mean, this week really does feel like the launch of the general election. I mean, the president has the biggest speech of the year, the State of the Union. We've just been talking about that coming up in 2 days. Obviously, tonight was a big night to make clear to the American public that Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. But let's go to Thursday. What do you want to hear from the president? What do you think it's important for people in the country who are making a decision about who they're going to support to hear?
Thanks for having me on this evening. I want to hear two things from the president as he makes his case in the State of the Union. The first is a clear exposition of how strong the economy is and of the strong trend line of lower costs. Americans still have a hangover from the bout of inflation that we experienced, but prices have stabilized, real wages are going up, and the president needs to punch that home. The second thing is immigration. Again, he needs to make clear that he supported a bipartisan Senate border security bill. It was Republicans who torpedoed it because they wanted to campaign on the issue, not govern on the issue. And he should re-extend his hand and say, I am still here, still ready to work on this issue. He has got to turn the economy and the immigration from issues that could be a liability in November to issues that can be tailwinds for him in November.
You've worked a lot on national security issues. You've been outspoken on a number of them. What do you want to hear from the president on the Israel-Hamas war?
On Israel, his continued support for the 6-week temporary ceasefire that would get the hostages home, that would allow humanitarian aid to be surged into Gaza, and that Hamas needs to accept for the good of the hostages and for the good of the Palestinian people. And on this issue of Israel, I think that these results tonight speak to a broader pattern as both candidates, Trump and Biden, look to rally their bases ahead of the general election. And I think the question here is, was Israel the equivalent of kind of the never Trump vote on the Democratic side? Was it something that was going to keep Democratic voters from supporting Joe Biden? To me, the answer is a clear no. No, it's not going to do that. Donald Trump has a real problem in his base. He's got a group of people who are not going to support him come what may. A minority of the GOP, but a persistent minority that will not support him. That does not exist on the Democratic side of the aisle. The issue of Israel, while there are strong opinions on that subject, is not going to keep people from supporting Joe Biden who are strong Democrats or unenrolled leaning left. And that, I think, is a massive, massive win for the president as he goes into a close election.
Yeah, it's an interesting difference. We're talking about this a little bit, how uncommitted. It's sending a clear message on a policy issue that's important and very much on the minds of many people in this country. But it doesn't mean it is a I'm never going to vote for Joe Biden vote, which is very different, as you just outlined, from the other side. So we did have a crew, Congressman, at a polling place in Needham, which is in your district. They talked to voters about a lot of issues. We heard a lot about the president's age. It didn't seem to bother folks. I want to play a little bit of that and get your thoughts on that.
Because I think he's been a very good president and he very much deserves being voted again. He slips on his words, but so do I. It has nothing to do with our brain. It's been a great 4 years, and of course, I'm plain frightened of the alternative.
A lot of people who have brought up concerns about his age. Does that concern you at all?
A little bit, not that much.
Not that much?
Again, to me, it's a no-brainer. He's a much better candidate.
Having had family members live in good mental aptitude into their mid-90s does not disturb me.
First of all, the people of Needham seem lovely. I'd like to go visit there. We all would. We're all going to Needham after this tomorrow. You know, I wanted to play that because, one, it's interesting to hear. I mean, that is the argument, right? That Joe Biden is a better candidate, a better president than Donald Trump. But it is still an issue that pops in the polls. What do you think that the president and his team should be doing to address that issue or to neutralize it?
If November is a referendum on is Joe Biden too old to be president, that's not a good thing for Joe Biden. November needs to be a choice between two older men, one of whom has been a good president and one who has been the worst president in American history, and whether Americans want to move forward with the good president or go back to chaos with the worst president. And that is the choice that I think the Biden campaign is well equipped, as Molly has been making clear, to put in stark terms to the American people. And we're going to see groups, young voters, for example, that have been more reluctant to date to support the president. I think as we get closer to November, that is going to crystallize, and that's going to galvanize those voters.
Congressman Auchincloss, we look forward to seeing you in Needham tomorrow. I really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for staying up late with us. We have much more to get to and talk about during this special hour. And up next, we'll shift our focus to North Carolina. Our North Carolina native is chomping at the bit over here, and a race for governor that could be the most expensive and closely watched of the year with the craziest Republican nominee. It's one we should all be paying attention to, especially because the Trump-endorsed guy, the Republican nominee I just mentioned, might be also the most extreme candidate in the country. We're back after a very quick break. You might remember back during the 2022 midterms, Republicans had a Trump problem. In competitive statewide races, Republican primary voters nominated extreme MAGA candidates. Candidates like Carrie Lake, she's still around. We'll still be talking about her. Blake Masters and Doug Mastriano, who then went on to lose very winnable races for the Republicans in November. Well, Republicans in North Carolina may have made that mistake again. Tonight, the state's Trump-endorsed Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson won the Republican nomination for governor. And even by MAGA standards, this guy has a lot of baggage. He called the survivors of the Parkland school shooting, quote, media prostitutes and little bastards who need to shut up. He has said that the acceptance of homosexuality will lead to, quote, the end of civilization as we know it. He has said that Muslims in America are invaders, and he has said that transgender Americans should find a corner outside somewhere to go to the bathroom. And that's all just a sliver of the controversy that follows the candidate that North Carolina Republicans just nominated. The gang is all back with me. Anthony Coley, you have been waiting to talk about Mark Robinson. Is it all day? Is it just the last few hours?
No, not this dude is. I've never seen anything like.
You're from North Carolina.
Yes.
You've done a lot of politics in the South, which is important for people to know.
Right.
What is the deal with this guy? I don't know that you can explain that, but how will this help the Democrats?
Oh, it's going to help them in a number of ways. So, but first, let me start by saying, you know, these vendors that sell these fake handbags on the street here in New York. Like, if Trump was the original, this guy would be like the knockoff brand, and the knockoffs are always worse than the original. This is a guy who came to power six years ago. He gave one speech in front of the city council in Greensboro, North Carolina. 2 years later, he's the lieutenant governor, and then along the way, he's like offending women and gay people and transgender people. I mean, you name it, he's offended you. The issue now is that he's about to run into a hurricane in the form of Josh Stein, the Democratic incumbent attorney general, who's the Democratic nominee. Josh Stein knows how to win in North Carolina. He's won twice statewide, each time Donald Trump was at the top of the ticket. And so, to answer your question, this could not be a better gift for Joe Biden in North Carolina. You've got this crazy candidate, but two other things, if you're Joe Biden, you got going for you. You've got, Ted Kennedy once told me, good policy makes for good politics. And that's playing out on the ground in North Carolina. This infrastructure law, $5.8 billion, roads, bridges, airports in North Carolina. And I grew up in the rural part of the state. David, I know you're familiar with kind of rural America as well. Like $2 billion in high-speed internet infrastructure. It may not sound like a big thing if you're in LA or New York City, but in rural America, that is transformative. And so the other thing about North Carolina, and I'm glad the Biden campaign has recognized this, they're already investing in the state. In this first ad buy that they did last fall, North Carolina was on the ad buy. I mean, he's already been on the air in North Carolina. So North Carolina is going to be the new Virginia. Mark my words. Say the tape.
I don't want you not to have a chance to share your thoughts on Mark Robinson. I mean, this guy is nominated in a swing state to be the governor from a party you once were a big part of.
Yeah, well, it's the end of the world as we know it. We're going to go down drinking mimosas, you know, dancing on the street, listening to some Beyonce. Did that make the list? Beyonce being
I'm sorry.
demonic?
He also satanic.
Satanic. I'm sorry. Jay-Z was demonic. It's hard to keep track. Yeah, he's rough. Okay, we've had a lot of rough candidates in the Republican Party, my former party, but this guy would take the cake, and I think he makes Carrie Lake look pretty mainstream, frankly. I mean, like the list of his comments on Facebook and other social media forums, weird alt-right social media forums, it's not good. But so the question is, can there be the reverse coattail? You know, you don't see that. You haven't seen a whole lot of that. And I think the big question is, when you're going into Charlotte, you're talking to my people, not the gays this time, the former Republicans, right? Like the banker in Charlotte. They're worried about the state economy with this guy. They're worried the businesses are leaving. You know, they're practical concerns. I'm not imagining they're voting against him, you know, because they care about gay rights, but maybe they do.
Or Jay-Z.
Or Jay-Z. But practically, they're like, this guy is in charge. Man, the jobs are going to start going to Virginia and South Carolina. They're going to go somewhere else. And so the question is, can you get that person to vote for Stein and Biden? You know, I think that's good. And is that even worth the resource effort for Biden? I think that's an open question. I'm going to call it a maybe. I don't think it's off the table.
Well, this is an interesting. So, I want to bring in Adrian because Adrian is another Southerner.
Yes, I love it.
She's actually She's from Arkansas. I know this because I heard her cheering for her team from the other side of a cubicle at BCCC for months, very loudly. But she's done a lot of campaigns in the South, just like you have, Anthony. She also knows a lot about the Biden team's strategy. North Carolina is the state that Biden came closest to winning and didn't win. How do you think the Biden team will play this? How will they use the nomination of an extreme gubernatorial nominee to help them in North Carolina?
Well, I think this is a good win in many ways for Joe Biden tonight, because this is exactly to what everyone on the panel has been talking about tonight. This is the problem with the Republican Party as we know it today. The MAGA Republican Party is they coalesce around these crazy candidates. Remember Roy Moore, and then of course Doug Jones came in and won that Alabama race a couple years ago. I think it was 2017. They coalesce around these MAGA extremists, and then they lose in the generals. This is only going to help Joe Biden. I think again, when you are looking at these independent swing voters, the ones who will ultimately decide, who wins in November. And they're looking at some of these extreme candidates, especially, this guy in North Carolina who's going to be the Republican nominee. It really does start to cause a lot of people to think, I don't know, maybe like you said, Jen, earlier, like people, not everyone is super excited about both Biden and Trump. But when you start looking at the extremist agenda of the Republicans and who they're putting up, it only helps President Biden, especially, again, among those key voters who don't necessarily make up the Republican Party base right now, but the key voters will ultimately decide the general election. Right. They are very turned off by MAGA extremism. They're very turned off by some of the comments and crazy comments that this guy is making. And that's the problem when you put up MAGA extremists. It's really hard. You may be able to do really well in a primary, but you are not going to do well in a general.
It's so true. The other thing that's interesting to me is the resources that have to be spent. I mean, there were some interesting stories over the last couple of days just about how much money outside Republican PACs are spending to try to defeat the extremist nominees. We saw this, and it didn't work back in 2022. But that's money. I mean, money doesn't grow on trees. It's not unlimited fundraising. How much does that impact them, David Jolly?
Oh, it's huge, but it also brings in presidential money as well. Look, I think there's zero surprise that he's the Republican nominee. We see candidates like this now. That's mainstream MAGA. But the question will be, we're going to find out, is North Carolina really a swing state, and is it competitive? And to Adrian's point, this helps remind North Carolina voters that it should be competitive. This is a gift to Joe Biden, and we can't overlook the issue of reproductive freedom. The ability to triangulate this candidate with one of the leading issues that's motivating voters right now on reproductive freedom in what should be a swing state. Look, I think Tim probably agrees with this. North Carolina has been a target for Dems, but it's a target that feels like it's been slipping away.
Yeah.
In the Electoral College math, Joe Biden needs to win North Carolina.
It's a key one. Okay, everybody stay where you are. Molly, you have lots of thoughts. I want to come to you right when we come back. Adrian Elrod, thank you as always. The rest of the panel is sticking around. Tennessee State Representative Justin Jones joins the conversation after a quick break. We'll ask him about what happened in his state tonight and what some of the data tells us about the state of the Republican Party. We'll be right back. We're getting more evidence tonight that the big lie is alive and well in the Republican Party. According to NBC's exit polling, a majority of GOP primary voters in the states of California, North Carolina, and Virginia say that they don't believe that President Joe Biden legitimately won the 2020 election. On top of that, most Republican primary voters in those three states say that Donald Trump is fit to be president, even if he is convicted of a crime, which says a lot about Trump supporters. Joining me now is Justin Jones. He's a state representative in Tennessee, where Donald Trump and Joe Biden both won their respective primaries tonight. One of my favorite people to talk to. Thank you so much for staying up with us late tonight. So there's no question that Trump supporters will forgive almost anything he does. I mean, I just gave an example of that. Does that kind of blind devotion concern you when you consider what Trump and his allies actually want to do?
Definitely, and good evening, Jen. I think it's the latest we've ever been on the news together, but it definitely is. It's definitely concerning. I mean, as we see in my state, the Republican Party has become the party of authoritarianism, as the party of mythology and lies, and it's just very concerning. I mean, this is the same mentality that we saw in our state, where we had extremists expel us, and their members were told to fall in line or you will be punished. And this is the same thing we're seeing in the Republican Party. It's almost like a cult-like following that we're seeing, and it should trouble us for the sake of our democracy. It should trouble us the direction that we're heading if people are going to get behind a man who is not only a criminal, but somebody who has incited violence and insurrection against our nation, and racist fear-mongering that has brought out the worst of what America is.
You've shown a very inspiring willingness to take a stand over and over again against your Republican colleagues in Tennessee who are taking extreme positions. What advice do you have for your fellow Democrats who will be running competitive seats up and down this ballot this November, who might be in red states? They might be in states where there are some extremist views. How should they be approaching these issues and difficult races?
I mean, this is precisely the time for moral clarity. What we saw in Tennessee today was that about 20% of voters, Republican primary voters, rejected Trumpism, voted for other candidates besides Trump, particularly in suburban counties like Williamson County. Williamson County was suburban white county, 30% of them voted. And so this is a chance to really make a difference, especially down ballot, to get these voters to see that we are the party. We are those who will fight for democracy. We are those who have moral clarity in this time of insanity and moral chaos. We are the party who will speak up and fight to protect kids and not guns. I think this is the time when we have to be bold. We have to show that we are unintimidated by these forces that want to take us back in our history and really want to destroy the institutions that we hold dear in this nation. I'm hoping that people see that this is really a choice between going toward authoritarianism and violence and going toward a multiracial democracy, which is the direction that we've been fighting for, to uplift all voices in our community.
For the people who are young, or they're just insomniacs, or they're up late at night because they love politics, or watching right now and they're thinking, this is just becoming more extreme by the day. Trump is influencing people across the country. You've been working to turn the tide on addressing gun violence on a range of issues. Is it going to take time? Is it more activism? What is it going to take? What hope can people have out there?
I think the hope is that this is a time that should not dishearten us, but it should be a time that offers us clarity, that what is at stake is what we love. And so, in times like these, we must use every tool at our disposal to protect our democracy, to fight for the future that we deserve. What gives me hope is I was just in Florida this weekend, and I've traveled this nation. I've traveled across my state talking to young people who are offering a vision of this nation, of what it can be and what it ought to be. And who, the one thing I know for sure, Jen, is that the Republican Party has lost the young vote, the rising generation. They have no chance of winning them. I had a reporter ask me, "Do you think Trump can win young black voters?" I said, that is delusional, just like the man who's running for president. I mean, they have no chance. They have lost our generation. And so what we have to do is to uplift and amplify the voice of young people, because they have this long-term vision. They have been the hope of this nation throughout history. When you look at the 1960s with young people sitting at lunch counters in Nashville to today, it's our time to speak up. And I think young people are important to have at the table, not just in symbolic positions, but to have at the table to offer perspective and vision of what direction that we want this nation to head.
Thank you, State Representative Justin Jones. You're speaking with moral clarity at 1:45 in the morning, which I have huge admiration for. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I always enjoy talking to you. We have to sneak in a very quick break, but the panel is coming back. They're still here. Talk about a very big week ahead for the presidential race, so stay with us. It's a big week ahead for President Joe Biden. On Thursday night, he'll deliver the State of the Union. And this isn't going to be your run-of-the-mill State of the Union address. In lots of ways, this is pretty much going to be a major campaign speech in the general election against Donald Trump. It's probably the most important speech he will give this year. And Biden is set to flat out ask the American people, whose side are you on? Are Americans on the side of lower health care costs, Ukraine's fight against Russia, and democratic freedoms here at home? Or are Americans on the side of profits for drug companies, tax breaks for the wealthy, and Russian President Vladimir Putin, the party of Putin? President Biden is hoping to argue that he is on the right side of these issues, and that's why voters should unite behind him against Donald Trump. We saw some hints of that in his statement tonight as well. That's all coming up less than 48 hours from now. I'm joined again by MSNBC political analyst Molly Jong-Fast, MSNBC analyst Anthony Coley, MSNBC political analyst and host of the Bulwark podcast Tim Miller, and former Republican Congressman David Jolly. So, Molly, the State of the Union is every year a huge speech. It is a huge audience.
Every year?
You don't?
Well, some years it's kind of
you don't
not a big
always.
deal.
Well, here's what I mean. you get a very big audience for a speech. There are diminishing audiences for speeches writ large. Speeches are no longer in vogue usually, but the State of the Union is a very big speech. My gut here is there's going to be a big chunk of this on the economy because they can't break through on that. They need to make gains on it. They're going to use it as an opportunity when people have to listen. There'll be other things in there. What do you think the president needs to do in this speech?
I mean, definitely economy. You're right. It's this is an attention economy, right? The game here is to get attention, get voters' attention. So I do think they'll talk about the economy. Look, the top line should be the Inflation Reduction Act reduced inflation. Like, it worked, right? We were told we were going to have a recession. We do not have a recession. And then the other thing they have to hammer home on, IVF and abortion and birth control. I mean, they have opened the door to say
mifepristone ban is coming.
Right. No, they said that in this, in Alabama, 5 frozen sows have the same rights as people. Like, nobody believes that. That is crazy.
And many Republican senators don't understand how IVF works. That's a sidebar. We'll discuss it another time. Anthony Coley, part of the State of the Union is it's a performance.
Absolutely.
And this is especially important, I would say, for President Biden, because still on the minds of voters is he's 81. Is he up for the job? What does that look like? Is it just his energy? Does he need a back and forth? What do you think he needs to do?
It's all of those things. I want to start with something she said, right? So he's got to talk not just about all of his legislative accomplishments that he's achieved with his Democratic Congress, but he's got to make it real and plain about how these things are measurably improving people's lives, right? It can't be a reference to the Federal Registry or some endangered species thing, as much as we support endangered species, right? It can't be any of that.
Don't let the endangered species people come after you.
So he's got to talk about
their old Republicans.
So we got to talk about the past. He's also got to talk about the future, begin to talk about his vision. Bill Clinton told us to don't stop thinking about tomorrow, so there's got to be a flavor of that. But to your point, his energy, his performance has got to match the robust vision that he lays out for the country. And I think that will go a long way to dispel this notion that he's not fit for the job, which he is.
There's this whole, I want to call it a game because it's very serious, writing the State of the Union. And also people are so obsessed with getting their things in there, they literally wait for you outside of the bathroom. Literally true. Part of this, though, and this was a little bit of this was in his statement tonight, is trying to appeal to Republicans, to independents. I bet, part of his speech is going to try to do that. There's a game, as I was going to say earlier, of like trying to get people to give a standing ovation. It's like, and that's why I'm going to protect bunny rabbits and ice cream. Like, who's against that? But like more serious policy things. What are some of those things where it will be hard for Republicans in the room? I'm not talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't even know what crazy thing she's going to do. But others in the room, maybe they're up for re-election, whatever it may be.
Sure. Well, I mean, for starters, I think about some of the traditional Republican issues that he's been good at. And sometimes he's been a little hesitant to talk about. Let's talk about energy, for example. We are doing record energy production right now. We are energy independent. I'd like to hear President Biden talk about that. I think that's hard not to clap at. They'll try. The Ukraine, I think, is another one. Divides the Republicans basically in half, and maybe even a little less than half now. But talk about his support for Ukraine, his support for freedom and for American values against the Russian threat. Go in and make a moral case about that, moral clarity, like Justin Jones said. And I think that, the Mitch McConnells of the world, they're going to want us to clap for that, I think, right? Maybe J.D. Vance won't, but he's not winning any J.D. Vance voters, right? You're trying to get the Mitch McConnell voter in Atlanta, win them over, right? And so energy and Ukraine are two that come to mind.
Those are good ones. All right, David Jolly, in the 1 minute we have left, bring us home. Do you think he should mention Donald Trump's name? Should he talk about him?
Yes. No, I think you can draw the contrast. I think posture is as important as policy. Be unapologetically on offense on the economy and the border. And I would also say for every candidate, including Joe Biden, you should presume that most voters don't know what you mean by protecting democracy or autocracy and interpret it for them. Your ability to vote and have your vote counted, your ability to make your own medical decisions, your ability to choose where your kids go to school and what books they read without the interference of government, bring home what liberty really means. The issues, Joe Biden is right on the issues, and he can win on the issues. He needs to own them and deliver it.
Real quick, because maybe we have 20 seconds left. Should he mention Donald Trump by name?
Yeah, why not?
What do you think?
Absolutely.
And you think so too?
Absolutely.
I think probably as well, although I don't think he will. That's my bet. Okay, Molly Jong-Fast, Anthony Coley, Tim Miller, David Jolly, thank you so much for staying up with us tonight. It was fun, it was interesting, it was engaging, I learned a lot. That does it for us tonight. Stay right where you are because there's much more special coverage coming up at the top of the hour.